Welcome back to another Reddit Readings video. If you enjoy these stories, don't be scared to leave a like. Now, do be scared. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. A dog is a man's best friend. I believe every single person heard this line at least once in their life. Dogs are constantly praised as these creatures of purity. However, about 4.7 million bites are reported each year in the USA. Then, people bring up the idea that it's never the dog's fault. They either claim that it's a fault of neglect from the owner or that the dog was provoked. It's almost like bringing up the nature versus nurture argument, but always blame nurture. Whoever does that couldn't be more wrong. My part of the town hates and is afraid of dogs, and for a good reason. When I was 6, my mom took me, my 4-year-old sister, and my 7-month-old brother to a playground. My sister and I were playing and running around while my mom watched our brother. It took only a minute for everything to go wrong. We begged her to go buy us some ice cream and she agreed only if we watched after our little brother while she was at the store. We promised to do so, but as soon as she left, we continued playing. We didn't even take the slightest look at our brother. What could happen? I thought to myself. After a minute, we heard a cry of a little baby and a woman's scream. I took a look at a trolley that my brother was supposed to be in, and what I saw scarred me for the rest of my life. A dog was standing next to the trolley with my brother's head in its mouth. My brother was screaming and shaking his arms and legs. I screamed and the woman tried to help, but the dog jumped to the side. It shook its head left and right so violently that my brother's head detached from his body. The body flew through the air and fell onto one of the kids on the playground. The kid started to scream, but through all the screaming, I could hear the cracking of my little brother's skull as the dog bit harder. The sight of the dog eating the remains of my little brother while the mothers picked up their children and covered their eyes was terrible. My little sister was too young to remember it properly, but I remembered everything, every single detail. I remember how it took the dog only one bite to tear off his little arm and another to spill his guts and drag them all over the floor. I will also never forget the wailing scream my mother let out when she saw what happened. She ran at the dog hoping to kill it with her bare hands, but it grabbed my brother's corpse and ran away. She tried running after it, but she was too slow. When she fell down to the floor, my sister and I ran up to her. Instead of pushing us away and blaming us for not looking after him, she just hugged us and never blamed us for the incident. "You were just kids," she used to say. "You just couldn't have done anything differently." I knew that she blamed herself because I remember seeing her get very drunk a few times. My dad also didn't blame us, and I was thankful for that. I, however, did blame myself for a long time. It was a terrible thing for a 14-year-old girl to believe, and it scarred me almost as much as the incident itself. Thankfully, this entire incident was reported to the police and the dog was put down only a day after my brother's death. The police said they found it sleeping near an abandoned cottage with the remains of my brother. From that day on, my neighborhood, and especially my street, hated dogs. There were a few people who owned a dog, but they never walked it around the neighborhood or let them stay out in the yard too much. They also kept them very quiet. Most people even rehomed the dogs or found a new place to live. Now you know why so many people in my neighborhood had cats for pets. They fulfilled that part of being man's best friend. People walked them around, trained them, played with them. Everything people did with dogs, we did with cats. It was pretty nice because even though cats would bite you sometimes, they couldn't maul you to death or devour your little brother while you're not looking. At the time this story takes place, I, Taylor, was a 17-year-old living with my parents. It was late November and our town was already decorated for Christmas. All I Want for Christmas Is You already started playing in all of the malls and all over the radio. Unfortunately, the snow never started to fall that year. It was just cold, ugly gray skies. It rained almost daily and even the smallest gust of wind made you shiver. There's just something so disgusting and depressing about having a winter like that. Kids didn't play outside, people didn't build snowmen or had snowball fights. It was just a colder, darker, and more depressing version of autumn. It was my last year of high school, and it really wasn't fun. The classes weren't much better than the weather. They were long, boring, and completely uninteresting. I usually liked to learn, but I guess that there was just something wrong about that year. I heard that 2 really common symptoms of depression were losing all interest in the stuff you liked before and gaining some weight. Judging by some other stuff as well, I believe I was depressed at the time, but I didn't realize it. No one did. I stopped hanging out with people. I still had my little group of friends, but I basically broke all contact with anyone else. My little sister, Lucy, had it much better. She was very popular at school, and she usually spent her days texting her friends. We still spent some time together and got along well. She was always good towards everyone and even spoke up while seeing other popular kids bullying someone. I liked having her as a sister. Sometimes, seeing her would make me think about how my little brother would have turned out. Lucy was 15 at the time, and since she didn't remember seeing what happened to our brother, my parents just told her that a dog killed him. They didn't go into detail. Being the second oldest child in an upper middle class family made my home life pretty good. Usually, I got everything I asked for. Hearing this, I believe many of you would question my mental state. It seems like I had it all. It sometimes seemed like that to me, but even when you have everything, you need someone to help you go through stuff. I've never had anyone for that. I was too scared to speak to my friends since I thought that they'll just laugh and stop talking to me. I didn't tell my parents because their reply was always, "Don't say that. You're just imagining it." Something did manage to help me in the end. On Christmas 2 years before the start of the story, my older brother, Daniel, who was 19 at the time, gifted me and Lucy 3 kittens he found at the shelter. One was light gray with dark gray stripes and adorable blue eyes. My sister named him Bunny. I named Luna, a calico kitten that cuddled up to me, immediately producing those adorable high-pitched meows. My brother named the last one. It was a pure black kitty and he named it Darkness. I hated that name. It sounded so stupid, but my brother insisted on calling her that. 2 years later, Bunny's eyes stayed blue. Luna just kept following me around all the time, and Darkness grew up to be the biggest female cat I have ever seen in person. Their personalities were vastly different as well. Bunny was always scared and only let me and Lucy pet him. Luna was playful and energetic. She let most of the people pet her, but she'd never let them take her away from me. Darkness started acting like royalty. She was elegant and majestic and would usually ignore Bunny's and Luna's attempts to play with her. She also avoided being petted by walking away. None of them ever tried scratching or biting any of us. It was a bit surprising since my brother was told that they were wild kittens someone found on the side of the road. The story begins on the 24th of October, 2018. It was a cold, dark Thursday with the constant possibility of rain. I walked through the street covered in puddles filled with dead leaves and broken twigs. The cold wind was blowing from the woods in the north. I stopped to take a look at the naked trees that turned gray and lifeless. It was a presence I felt there, like something was watching me. Even though I felt it a few times before, it was different this time. It woke up this fear in me, this fear I did not feel for a long time. The fear I felt when I last saw my little brother. I stood there staring at the woods, hoping to see whatever made me feel its presence. Taylor, an old lady's voice called from my left. She made me jump. "Oh, Mrs. Gerard," I smiled. "You almost gave me a heart attack." The feeling of being watched was still there, but I was distracted by the old lady. She was dressed in all black. It was very unusual for her and even the entire neighborhood. But I guess there are times for everything. "Have you seen Milton?" she said, lifting a piece of paper from the stack she was holding. The paper had a picture of a cat. It was dark gray with beautiful green eyes. Above the picture, it read as follows: "Have you seen Milton?" There was more text all over the paper. It stated that Milton was 12 and would respond to both Milton and Milt. He was a playful cat obsessed with balls. If he saw one, he needed to touch it with his paw. "Sorry, Mrs. Gerard," I told her. "I haven't seen him, but I'll be sure to bring him to you if I do." "Thank you, Sugar," she replied in a sweet voice. Her southern accent made her much warmer, but there was sadness in it. Her home was far away, her kids even further, and her husband left her for the other side 2 years ago. Cancer took him, and with his departure, she stayed a lonely old lady without a purpose in life. She found one when she received Milton as a pet from her son. He knew he wouldn't be able to visit her often, so he gifted her Milton to keep her company. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Gerard. I should go home now. I hope you find Milton soon." She smiled and continued on her way. I followed her with my gaze for a bit and watched as she put the papers on the light posts and trees. At that point, the terrifying presence was gone. However, I could not continue further if I did not throw another look at the woods. The silence and the depressive appearance of the woods didn't make me feel much better. Lucy opened the door for me when I came home. Both of my parents went on a business trip since they worked in the same company. They left the day before on Wednesday, 23rd of October, 2018. They said that they'll be back by the next Wednesday, 30th of October, 2018, just before the Halloween. They always loved Halloween since it made them remember making costumes with me and my little sister. They wanted us to stay at home, but one of my friends invited me to a party. I planned on asking them if I could go when they come back, but I doubted that they'll allow me. "Did you get any FS today?" Lucy asked me. That's usually what we asked each other instead of saying hello. I don't remember how it started, nor did it have any special meaning behind it, and we always answered. "No," I replied, "but I got a B from math." "There's some food on the table," she told me. "Sorry, I need to go back to my room." "Why?" I asked, surprised. "I'm talking to a guy from school." She smiled and ran up the stairs. I felt something lean onto my leg, and after looking down, I saw Luna standing beneath me with her head pointed upwards. She meowed and I picked her up, giving her a kiss on the forehead. She meowed and pressed her paw on my cheek. I put her down on the floor and sat by the table. I pulled out a chair for Luna since she liked to sit by the table while I was eating. She never tried to jump onto the table or snatch some food from it, but she liked to watch. I usually asked her if she was hungry, to which she would just slowly blink and look away. She was a cute little beastie. "What would I do if you disappeared?" I whispered to her while eating. She lifted her paw and started licking it. They always find the most unusual moments to clean themselves. I never got how they manage it. After I was finished eating, I changed my clothes and went outside. I liked sitting on a rock next to a creek near my house. It was in the woods but close enough to the edge that I was never afraid to be there. Not even when I was 11 and discovered it at 11 p.m. My parents tried stopping me from going there when I was younger, since gangs and drug dealers were pretty common in my town. It wasn't really the smallest town out there, but it was no New Yorker. There were always a few essentials when I went to the creek. A blanket because the rock was rough and, in this part of the year, very cold. Headphones and my phone helped me calm down often. Sometimes I listened to music, and sometimes I liked to listen to the nature around me. During spring, summer, and early autumn, I loved to listen to the rustling of the leaves, the chirping of birds, and the murmuring of the slow-moving creek. However, the most important things were a small notebook and a wooden pencil box with everything I needed to use for drawing. In December of 2017, I decided to go to the creek once a week and draw the scenery each time. I wanted to get better at drawing and wanted to see how the creek changes through the year. My favorite moments needed to be during the spring and summer. Even if there were a ton of mosquitoes and other insects, the creek was beautiful. The greenery from the bushes and trees, the light blue sky, and the clear creek water through which you could see the gray of the gravel and stones beneath it. Sometimes deer would come to drink from the creek, and once I even saw a deer with her fawn. They usually noticed me, but since I was further away and didn't really approach them, they didn't really care. I saw foxes as well. They were a bit more curious about me and sometimes sat only a few feet away from me. I rarely brought Luna with me. If I did, I'd hold her on a leash so that she wouldn't get snatched by foxes or get too close to the deer. They can be dangerous and unpredictable, and you don't need to do a lot to kill a cat when you're that size. This time though, I didn't bring her. I never brought her during winter or late autumn. It was just too cold for her. The contrast between the late autumn or winter and other seasons was astonishing. Instead of the chirping of the birds and rustling of the leaves, you heard the swipes of strong winds and cracking of weak branches. Other than that, it was just eerie and uncomfortable silence. It felt like you were alone and that there was nothing you could do but wait for your inevitable demise. I put the blanket on the rock, sat down, and opened my notebook. First, I wrote the date at the top of the page. The first thing I drew was the outlines. I pressed my pencil on the paper so softly that the line was barely visible, but just enough not to be a problem later when I start detailing. Even though it was depressing and uncomfortable, I can't deny its beauty. I don't know what the most common type of tree in the forest was, but the tree bark usually turned gray during autumn and stayed that all the way until the beginning of spring. The leaves always turn orange, yellow, or somewhat red. They are never brown. Combined with the sky, it makes it the opposite of the same forest during summer. The sky and the trees are colorless, boring, and ugly, while the ground is covered in beautiful, vibrant colors. It's almost like you turned the summer version of the forest upside down. After some time, the drawing started to look good. I finished adding the basic details that I'd expand on later on the left side of the drawing. I started adding them to the creek and took a quick glance at it. With each look, the creek looked better and better. I turned my eyes back towards the notebook. While trying to depict the movement of the water, I started feeling that unsettling sensation again. I lifted my head and looked around. I could not see anything in front of me. I looked to my sides and behind me, but there was nothing there. I chalked it up to my mind being confused, but I stayed on high alert. The entire time I was wearing headphones, so I didn't hear anything. I sometimes got a feeling like that during the night, but there was no one there, so I assumed that was the case this time as well. Another 15 minutes passed, during which I felt the same thing. Through my constant quick glances, I haven't seen anything but the abandoned lonely forest. The feeling was stronger when I was looking at the notebook, and it got weaker while I was trying to see if there was anything around. The next thing I decided to do was to act like I was drawing something but kept my eyes on the forest. Nothing was happening even though I knew there was someone there. At this point, I didn't even care what their intention was. I just wanted to know who was there. Calling out after them wasn't the brightest idea since that way it might provoke them to attack me. It seemed like whoever was doing this knew that I was watching them, so I realized there was only one thing left to try. I needed to look at the top of my notebook and immediately turn my eyes back toward the forest. That's exactly what I tried doing. I took a look at the top of the notebook and kept my eyes on it. Suddenly, at the edge of my eyes, just above the notebook, in the blurry area of my sight, I saw a shadow dart from one tree to another. I instantly lifted my eyes off of the notebook and looked toward the place where the shadow passed. Instead of seeing a person standing there looking at me, or seeing someone's arm protruding from behind a tree, what I saw was so much simpler, but so much scarier. There was a trail where the leaves were missing. It led from one tree to another that was a bit above 300 feet away from me. The leaves were flying in the air and slowly falling back to the ground. It was like something dashed from one tree to the other one with such speed it created its own small gust of wind. I've seen people do it before, but no one was ever trying to hide from me in such a sinister way. As soon as I realized what that meant, my heart stopped. I jumped up and started breathing heavily. It felt like the time slowed down and like I was about to die. I knew someone was hunting me. I quickly grabbed my pencil box and put it in my bag. It meant a lot to me. I closed the backpack and put it on my back before picking up the blanket and the notebook. After all that, I started booking it back to the street. My house wasn't directly next to a forest, but it was close enough. It connected perpendicularly to the road on the edge of the forest and was the third house on the right side of the street. The entire time I was running, I felt like something was running after me and trying to catch me, but I heard no footsteps, no rustling of the leaves, no nothing, just my footsteps and my heavy breathing. After about a minute of running, I burst out of the forest into the other side of the street. When I looked behind, there was nothing there and the feeling of being watched was gone. I don't know how I managed to escape from whoever that was, but I was so happy that I crouched down and started crying. I cried out of fear as well because I don't know what could have happened if I had made even the smallest mistake. It took me another minute to get it all together. I stood up and went home. "What the hell happened to you?" Lucy asked me after opening the door. "Nothing," I lied. "I just had a bad day. Do you want to talk about it?" "No," I replied. "I just had to cry for a bit." I smiled at her. "Okay, but if you need everything, I can hang up on Thomas. He'll understand." "Who, Thomas? Is he cute?" She nodded as a smile appeared on her face. "Then don't let him wait for too long." She hugged me and ran up the stairs. While watching her run up the stairs, I noticed Luna standing behind a wall and looking outside. "Hey, Luna," I said softly. She always reacted when I called after her. However, this time she didn't react. I quickly turned around fearing the worst. I expected to see the person from the forest standing in front of the door with a wide smile on their face and a knife in their hand, but I saw nothing. The view was just of the house on the opposite side of the street. I closed the door and immediately felt safer. Only then, Luna looked into my eyes and meowed. "You felt it too, little girl?" I asked, wishing that cats could speak. CATATER, watching PRESSNCE. My parents returned from their business trip on the morning of the 30th of October. My sister and I were at school at the time, so we didn't get to greet them immediately. We didn't even know that they came home so early since they told us that they'll return in the evening. After I got home, I saw Darkness sitting on the grass in the front yard. I got angry at Lucy since I thought Darkness just escaped outside when she opened the door. I unlocked the front door and got into the house. "Lucy," I said, dropping my backpack on the floor. "Why is Darkness outside?" I turned around, walked up to Darkness, picked her up, and brought her back inside. After closing the door, I saw my mom running up to me and she hugged me. "I missed you girls so much," she said. "What are you doing here so early?" I asked her. "You told me that you'll return in the evening." "We lied," she chuckled while still hugging me tightly. "You can let go now, Mom," I told her. "You'll suffocate me." She moved away but kept her arms on my shoulders. She was always like that. When I left for my first sleepover at the age of 12, she didn't want to let me go and cried even though I was only 5 minutes of walking away. She was always overly attached. Maybe she was overprotective because of what happened to my little brother. "Hey, Taylor," my dad said, peeking from the kitchen. "Hi, how was the trip?" I asked both of them. "It was good," my mom answered. "It was just a few meetings a day and then free time." My dad continued. "A lot of free time." I sat down at the kitchen table. My parents ordered pizza and all 4 of us had lunch when it arrived. I wanted to ask them if I could go to the party the day later, but I was anxious about it. I didn't think that they'd allow me since I was underage. My parents were also very tired, so I didn't want to harass them with my questions. Lucy was literally devouring her pizza with a big smile on her face. She was probably talking to that boy Thomas and wanted to get back to him. She has been constantly speaking to him over her phone. She would just lay in her bed and giggle constantly. I started closing the doors to my room because I started to hear her even if her doors were closed. When she was done, she put her plate in the dishwasher and run back to her room. At that moment, I was alone with my parents and decided to ask my dad a question, a different one. "Hey, Dad," I said, "do you still have that old camera?" "Yes, it's in the bedroom," he told me. "Why do you ask?" "I want to take the picture of the creek. I'll try drawing it off of the picture." I was scared to go back so soon. I tried going the day before, and even though I didn't feel that presence, I was still terrified. My heart was pumping so fast that I thought I was going to die. I ran back to my house, but I didn't cry this time, nor did I mention anything to Lucy. "Okay, I'll try to find it after lunch," he smiled. "Thank you," I replied. I was in my room when he brought me the camera. It was an old Polaroid camera, but a high-quality one. It was my grandma's, and that meant I needed to return it in perfect condition. Only 10 minutes later, I left to go take a picture of the creek. I stopped in front of the forest and my fear started to grow. I didn't feel like anything was watching me and like I would be completely safe. But the fear from the last time was just making me question if I wanted to do it. In the end, I decided to do it as fast as I can. I walked fast and fought my way through the piles upon piles of leaves covering the entire forest floor. A smile appeared on my face when I reached the creek. However, it disappeared a second later. I remembered why I was hesitant to go and fear overtook me once more. I barely managed to climb onto the rock and I took a picture of the creek. Apart from the murmuring of water, the forest was silent and I saw no animals. Well, the fish were still there, but no birds, deer, or foxes. It wasn't an unusual thing, but it was still a bit creepy. The longer I sat there, the fear slowly got better and better. I wished that I took my notebook and the pencil case. I sat there for another 10 minutes and took a few more pictures. I walked slowly back home. The fear wasn't there anymore, and I was sure that the next time, I would have no problem sitting there for a few hours while drawing. When I got back to the street, the first thing I noticed was the posters on a light pole next to me. They were all pictures of cats. One of those was Mrs. Gerard's old cat, Milton. The one below it was a cat that disappeared 5 days before I saw the poster, while the one above depicted one that disappeared 2 days before I saw the poster. Was there a fox that caught a cat and liked the taste of it so it wanted more? Or maybe a coyote? Or maybe there was even a person who hated the neighborhood for disliking dogs and started killing cats because of it. I've talked to dog lovers who are lunatics before. Something like this being the case wouldn't surprise me too much. After returning home, I chose the best picture and started drawing. My parents took a nap since they were tired from the trip. While drawing, I noticed something in the picture. In the creek, there was a small gray object that was clearly not a rock. It was floating in the middle of the creek, and I didn't know how I didn't notice it when I was sitting on the rock. I tried to identify what it was and lifted the picture closer to my eyes. I couldn't see what it was no matter how hard I tried to look. I checked the other pictures and it looked like it was carried away by the creek. It was only barely visible in 2 other pictures. I couldn't see what it was and just brushed it off as a branch or something. What else would it be? Later that day, I went downstairs to get some water since I was thirsty, and I noticed my dad sitting on the couch and watching TV. This was the perfect time to ask, "Hey, Dad," I called after him. "What is it, sweetie?" he said, still keeping his look at the TV. "Candace invited me to this party tomorrow," I told him. "Can I go?" He turned his head towards me with a big confused expression on his face. "Don't you have school tomorrow and on Friday?" he asked. "I do, but..." "You're not going," he replied. "Why? You have school on Friday and you are underage." "But I won't drink," I protested, "and I'll be home before." "I don't want to hear it," he said strictly. "You're not going." I just stood there disappointed with his answer. I was so angry and he noticed it. "Look, kid, I'm sorry that it has to be this way, but I just want the best for you. You can have a sleepover on Friday if you want." "No," I replied. "I don't want to." I returned to my room after that. I heard Lucy speak to Thomas while passing next to her room, and I got an idea. I opened the door to her room and shut them behind me. "What the hell are you doing?" Lucy asked, jumping from her bed. "I need you to help me," I told her. "I'm talking with someone," she replied angrily. "He can wait for a bit. I just have to ask you something." She stared at me for a second before picking up her phone and unmuting herself. "I'll be back soon, Thomas." "Okay," I heard him say from the other side. She hung up and crossed her arms. "So, what's so important?" she asked me. "I need you to cover for me tonight. Dad doesn't want me to go to a party, but I really want to." A confused smile appeared on her face since I was never the person to sneak out or disobey my parents. I was the golden child, if you could say so. Why are you looking at me like that? Please, Lucy, help me. Only this one time. I'll help you, she chuckled. It's just a surprise that you want to sneak out. Okay, I stopped for a second. How the hell do I sneak out? Well, you know Mom and Dad. Each Halloween they get tired from talking to so many kids. The kids are incredibly irritating and tiring. Every single one wants to take so much more candy than they're allowed. That means Mom and Dad will go to bed at around 10 p.m. After that, you can just leave through your window. Maybe try to ignore Dad a bit and put pillows under your blankets so that he thinks you're just angry that he didn't allow you to go to the party. How did I not think of that? I asked, not expecting an answer. What would I do without you, little sis? I owe you. You sure as hell do. She smiled. Now, get out. I want to talk to Thomas. The next morning, I tried avoiding my dad. I'd answer only the most basic questions like when does my school end? The breakfast like that was a bit of a weird experience for me, but I still went on with it. When he offered to take me to school, I agreed, but I haven't spoken a word to him while in the car. I just put on my headphones. While in school, I told Jessica that I'll go to the party, to which she replied that the location changed. The party was going to be in a house near the woods. It was owned by her parents. After hearing that, I got chills. It was near the forest. It was nowhere near the rock. But it's not hard for someone to just patrol the forest, and since there will be loud music, it will even make it easier for the person to find us. However, I still decided to go since nothing happened while I was at the rock the day before. The rain was falling that morning, and listening to the rain made classes a bit more bearable. I liked both the smell and the sound of the rain, but how the streets looked after it was terrible. Like every other day, the street was depressing. Puddles covered with trash, weird smell, full of little broken branches. When I got home, Mom opened the doors for me and Luna ran up to me immediately. After lunch, I closed myself into my room and stayed there the rest of the day. Hey, I know you're angry at me for not letting you go to that party, my dad said, standing in the doorway, but I think it would be the best if you didn't go. I didn't reply. You'll understand when you have kids. Good night, he said before leaving and closing the door behind him. 10 p.m. just passed and he was dressed in pajamas earlier, so he was going to sleep. I would just need a few minutes to wait for them to fall asleep. I started to get ready. I almost got a heart attack when the door to my room opened. But it was just Lucy. When will you be back home? She asked me. I don't know, I answered. Then how should I know when to open the window for you? Just leave it unlocked. I'll get in myself. Are you insane? Someone could get in. No one will get in, Lucy, I said, annoyed. I'm not so sure. Come on, I cut her off. Don't be a pussy. Fuck you. She got angry. I'm helping you and you're insulting me. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologized softly. Please, don't worry. No one will come through the window, I guess, she said, clearly showing that she was contemplating if it was a good idea. Can I go to sleep then? Sure, I smiled. But I don't mind if you continue talking to Thomas. She exhaled and smiled. After she left the room, I finished dressing up and stepped out through the window. I put my leg onto the garage roof and gently pulled myself out. After gently and quietly closing the window, I got down by grabbing a branch of a tree that was near the garage. I planned on climbing back up using the drain pipe. I tried climbing it before, and while it was hard, I was able to do it. The street was even worse during the night. The street was still covered in puddles filled with cigarettes and other trash. Small broken branches laid all over the floor, and even some chestnuts that crows tried to break during the day. However, I could only see parts of the street. The moonlight wasn't strong enough to allow me to see the entire street, and I needed to rely on the street lights. There was enough space between them to leave some unlit area, and honestly, I found it super scary. Just imagine someone walking towards you, then disappearing in the dark area. And when they get to the next lit up area, they are already running. Thoughts like that made me shiver. The fastest way to get to Jessica's house would be over the street next to the forest. But I didn't have enough courage to take it. I wasn't afraid of walking down the street because I can scream. And even then, someone is much less likely to attack you in a populated area instead of a forest. I didn't believe that whoever was in the forest that day stalked me. It was just a coincidence that I and whoever that person was found each other in the same place. They probably just go around the forest and maybe like to look at people. I remember feeling that presence before I even got home that day, so they were probably just passing by through the forest, saw me, and thought that I could be their next victim or something. I don't think that they're stalking me because I would have felt their presence again and I would have seen them for sure. When I got to the street which ended in Jessica's house, it was decorated with Halloween symbols. I was surprised that I didn't see any trick-or-treaters while walking for those 15 minutes. It was 10 p.m., but it was a really safe neighborhood, and I remember trying to sleep the previous years while constantly hearing trick-or-treat songs through the closed window of my room. Maybe this year was just so ugly that no one actually had the will to take their kids out or to wait for their older children to get home. There's a possibility that everyone decided just to let their kids go trick-or-treating the day later. That way, they could stay out for longer. As I was getting closer to Jessica's house, the music coming from it got louder and louder. Fortunately, the street that led to it was empty. The only house on it was Jessica's house, while it was surrounded by meadows from both sides. Those meadows were the line between the woods and the line of houses. The street didn't have any lights, so I had to rely on the moonlight, which helped a bit. I stopped for a second to look at the grass swinging in the cold autumn wind as their smooth surfaces reflected the white glow of the moon. There was peace in that sight, and it made me smile. Jessica opened the doors when I got to the house. She squealed with happiness and hugged me. She was wearing one of those slutty cat costumes. I wasn't surprised by that. The two of us go way back. We were friends from the age of 5. As we got older, Jessica started to become more and more popular while my friend group kept shrinking. She didn't care about it, and I loved her for that. I didn't know why she still hung out with me sometimes. I noticed her new friends criticizing and not liking me, but I didn't know if Jessica was a good person. Well, just not the smartest. There's a possibility that she didn't understand the social structure of our high school. "Hey, old friend," she shouted after letting go of me. "Come in." Even before coming in, I could hear the people shouting, and I saw the plastic cups set up in a triangle on a table. Great, I thought to myself unsarcastically. I wanted to try alcohol for a long time, but haven't had the opportunity to do so. I didn't go to many parties, and my parents never allowed me to try. In my eyes, this was the perfect moment to try it. For the first few minutes, Jessica just dragged me around and introduced me to her friends. Most of them seemed nice, but I was sure it was a facade for some of them, or most of them. After about half an hour later, I managed to get away from Jessica and gathered the courage to try some alcohol. I decided to start with punch and gradually got to other alcohols. I didn't like most of it, and since it was my first time drinking, I got drunk pretty fast. It made me much more outgoing and relaxed. I found it much easier to talk to people, but it came with a cost. I got really sick. I didn't drink much, but again, it was my first time. I needed to throw up. The glass door in the kitchen led to the backyard, and I ran out after opening them. Somehow, I remembered to run up to the fence and throw up over it since I didn't want to give Jessica any trouble. The wooden fence that separated the backyard and the forest was only 3.5 feet tall, so leaning over it wasn't a problem. The problem appeared when I stopped throwing up. This weird, terrible smell started to creep up my nose, and it took me a few seconds to realize what it was. The scent of rotting flesh made me look around for its source, and I found it. Jessica had a 7-year-old cat named Denim. Denim's carcass was laying down next to a tree. Its guts were spilled out, and its front left leg was completely missing. There were bite marks all over its body, and it was completely covered in blood. There was a puddle of blood below it as well. Suddenly, while I was leaning onto the fence, I felt that fear, that ancient dread. There was someone there, in the woods, just outside my eyesight, and they were looking at me. Their intentions felt evil, and just imagining what they looked like terrified me. At first, due to being drunk, I thought I was just feeling something wrong. But when the branch cracked just beyond the wall of the forest darkness, I knew someone was really there. I immediately started stumbling backward. After almost falling after a few steps, I turned around and almost immediately ran into someone. As soon as my body collided with theirs, I thought it was all over. So many thoughts ran through my head. The snapping of the branch could have come from behind me, but because I was drunk, I didn't realize it. Or the person from the woods was fast enough to run out, jump over the fence, and stop behind me. I believed that the last thing I'd see would be the cloudy night sky and the stars behind it. I closed my eyes, awaiting the unavoidable death the terrible figure that stood before me was going to make me experience. "Are you okay?" someone asked uncertainly. I took another look at the figure I ran into and realized it was a guy my age. He was leaning over and was looking at me with a concerned expression. You aren't going to kill me?" I asked, surprised that I am still alive. "Why would I do that? I just saw you puking and thought that you might need help. I stopped right here when I saw you stumbling away from the fence. Do you need any help?" And no, I barely managed to stand up. "I'm okay. I just got scared of the darkness," I said, looking back at the forest. The feeling was still there, and I knew that the person from the forest was looking at me, but it could also be an animal, a wolf or a bear maybe. They sometimes appear in those woods. I've heard that horses have that feeling as well. They can almost always when the predators are trying to make them their dinner. And I've heard stories of people losing control over their horse only to later find out that a wolf or a cougar was following them. Maybe we humans have the same ability, but much weaker than that of horses. The guy stopped for a second. "It's just an animal probably." I quickly turned around towards him and felt the eyes from the forest piercing through the back of my skull. "Do you feel it too?" I asked him. He nodded up and down. I took another quick glance at the woods and started walking back to the house. "Let's go inside," I told the guy. "I don't feel safe out here. I think that would be the best idea." He smiled and followed me. After I closed the glass door, I felt like the feeling got weaker, but it didn't disappear. I noticed that some other people felt very uneasy. One girl was sitting on a couch and was biting her nails. Some guy was sitting on a chair by a table, but instead of being focused on the conversation the other people by the table had, he was looking through a window that looked towards the backyard. He was shaking his leg and sweating badly. He felt whoever or whatever that was in the forest. What I also noticed is that only the people who were not drunk noticed the presence. I believe that the only reason I felt it was because I sobered up a bit after puking and I was really close to the forest. Everyone else, including Jessica, was completely oblivious to the possible danger from the woods. The guy I ran into while I was outside and I spent a bit of time together. We tried talking to other people so that we would forget the terror we felt outside and the one running through our veins. I told him about Jessica's cat Denim. We decided not to mention it to her since we didn't know how much Denim meant to Jessica and we didn't want to ruin her party. After about half an hour, the fear of the presence disappeared. I and many others immediately got calmer and continued enjoying the party. I decided to not drink anymore since I threw up, but I still had a good time. I had so much fun I forgot to watch the time, so when I suddenly remembered to check the time and realized it was 4 a.m., I started panicking. Shit, I said, standing up from the house. What's wrong? The guy from the backyard asked me. I need to go home, I said. My parents don't even know that I'm here. I can drive you, he replied. Who? Someone likes you, Jessica commented. I just ignored her. You don't need to, I told him. I don't live far away, but it's late and you said you needed to be back as soon as possible. By his tone, I realized that he just wanted to find an excuse to leave the party, and driving me was a perfect one. I agreed for him to drive me and we left after saying goodbye to our friends. Well, he said goodbye to his friends. I only waved at Jessica and waited for the guy. He told me which car was his and I waited for him there. Since I wasn't right next to the forest, I felt a bit safer. The moon was now blocked by the clouds and the lit-up lively meadows were now dark and eerie. The air was cold and the wind made it even worse. I had my hands in the pockets of my jacket and lifted my shoulders to keep my head and neck warm. I don't know how Jessica managed to stay in that cat outfit. It was warm outside, but she was still the one who opened the doors for new arrivals. Suddenly, I felt it again. Someone was watching me. But no matter how terrible the feeling was before, this one was so much worse. Unlike before, when everyone could see me and react quickly enough, I was completely isolated in front of the house. The curtains were pulled down on the front windows and made it impossible to see the front yard and the street unless you're looking through the peephole. I was alone in this. While frantically looking around, I took a few steps backward. The guy from earlier was still inside the house and I could only hope that he'll come outside soon. Wherever I looked, I could not find the person or the animal looking at me. There was nowhere to hide. The front yard didn't have a fence and there was nowhere to hide in the meadows. I thought that maybe the presence was hiding behind a tree even though the forest was further away. I looked around and checked everywhere and nothing was there. The dreadful feeling was getting worse and worse and I started to panic and hyperventilate. Then I remembered a single place I didn't check. When we were younger, Jessica and I had a group of friends. After starting high school, only Jessica and I stayed in contact while everyone else stopped hanging out with each other. We would usually go to play at the house I was standing in front of and our favorite game used to be hide and seek. Going into the woods was forbidden, but we could hide inside and outside. The yard and the meadows didn't really have many hiding places, so no one tried to hide outside unless they didn't have time to hide somewhere else. However, this one time, we were playing in the late evening. The sun set down, but there was still enough light for us to see perfectly. Jessica was trying to find us and it took her about 10 minutes to find all of us, except one boy. The rest of us helped her to find him, but we were unsuccessful. After 15 minutes of all of us collectively trying to find him, Jessica shouted that we were done since it was getting dark and that he won. We heard him scream out of joy. The scream came from the outside and the rest of us ran into the front yard. "Where are you?" Jessica asked. "Follow my voice," he answered. As soon as we heard him say that, we looked up towards the house and we saw him standing and leaning on the chimney of the house. He was barely visible to us because of how dark it was. But after he got down, we all admitted that it was a good hiding place. It really was a good hiding place, both in my childhood and on that Halloween. Immediately after I pointed my eyes at the chimney, a dark figure was peeking from behind it. I could only see its head and its right shoulder before it quickly hid behind the chimney. It was a human. Do you know how in the movies when someone sees something terrifying, they scream or have a mental breakdown? I didn't. I could just stand there in shock because I could not believe what I saw. Someone was standing on that roof and probably had terrible intentions. My brain wanted me to scream and run, but all my body could do is stand there in shock. The guy from earlier leaving the house broke me out of the trance. He looked at me and a concerned expression appeared on his face. He slowly walked up to me. "Let's get out of here," I said, quickly glancing at the roof. "Okay," he replied before unlocking his car. I sat down in the front passenger seat and noticed that the guy took a look at the roof. He stood there for a few seconds and sat down in the driver's seat. He had a confused expression on his face. "What the hell was that feeling?" he asked me. "What feeling?" I played stupid. "The fear we felt in the backyard." "What the hell was it?" "Instinct," I replied. He looked at me and started the car. He asked me for my name when he got me home. "Taylor," I told him. "Terrence," he replied. "I hope we see each other again." I smiled and he left. As I turned around, I remembered that I had to climb the garage drainage pipes to get back to my room. After a deep sigh, I tried climbing. I managed to do it after about 5 attempts. After opening the window, I slowly and quietly took off my jacket and got dressed in my pajamas. I locked the window and jumped onto the bed. I didn't sleep that night at all. Instead, I kept staring through the window. It was perfectly placed for me to be able to see the chimney on the house opposite to mine. CATATER, incredible mystery. The searches started. They were trying to find the animal that did it, but after that party, I don't know if it was an animal, a fox, coyote, or a jackal are all reasonable answers, but they haven't found any. They thought that maybe it had a burrow or some other time of shelter where it could hide easily. The idea that a human did it came only after 3 searches without results. I don't know who started the rumor that a human was doing it, but I supported it completely. On the 13th of November, the 4th search was started. Even my brother, who didn't have college classes at the time for some reason, joined the search. Who or what were they looking for? From the early morning of the 1st of October up until the 9th of November, 17 neighborhood cats were found massacred. Most of the cats had more than half of their flesh eaten. We only found the skeletons from the other ones. One of the cats was found cut in half with its 2 parts connected only with its guts. The cat was pregnant when the cat was killed, and the bodies of 5 little kitties it carried were laid out on the floor next to their mother's guts. Another cat was found impaled on a branch about 7 feet above the ground. The big branch completely decimated the cat's ribs, and due to its size, it pushed one of the cat's lungs out through the other side. That one, I believe, was found on the 3rd search on the 12th of November, and that was the one that led everyone to believe that a human was responsible for that. There was another one that helped with that as well. The entirety of its body was crushed and unsettlingly boneless. It seemed like the only part of it that wasn't crushed was its tail. People came to the conclusion that it was picked up by the tail and swung around. What kind of a sick person would do stuff like that? I only found one strange thing about this. Usually, when someone's a sociopath, they do kill animals, but just as a starter practice. After some time or a certain number of dead animals, they switch to humans. But killing 17 cats in only a week is more than insane. I also assumed that all the 3 cats I saw the posters for were killed by this person as well. Jessica's cat Denim also fell victim to their sick game. That makes it a total of 21 cats. After the number of dead cats reached the public, people started to be afraid and they started to lock their cats inside. We did the same. Luna and Bunny weren't really outdoor cats, so they didn't have a problem with staying inside the entire time. Darkness, however, was very different. She would constantly scratch at the windows or the front door and meow, expecting us to let her out. We never did. My brother Daniel sometimes took her out in the yard, but he always put her on a leash so that he can just pull her closer to him if need be. Lucy and I always warned him to be careful and begged him not to take her outside, but he just laughed at that. We should go help them in the next search, Elle told us. Are you insane? I asked. Why would we do that? If they can't find it, how would we? Well, Elle knows the forest almost as good as her dad, Caitlin answered, and since he doesn't have time to help in the search, Elle is their next best option. Exactly, Elle pushed the idea. The 3 of us became friends at the beginning of high school, and were almost separable. Apart from Luna, they were the only thing that could make me genuinely happy, and I felt pretty safe around them. As Jessica strayed further from me, I needed to start finding new friends, and after a couple of small interactions, I realized that these 2 were perfect for me. We generally liked the same stuff, enjoyed the same activities, and liked similar foods, yet our personalities were very different. Caitlin wasn't the most open person out there, but she could talk to people without becoming anxious and messing it up for no reason. I would love to be like that. She is the smartest out of the 3 of us and has good grades in most of the subjects without even doing much work at home. She was always interested in it and that kind of stuff and was very good with devices. The drawing was another one of her passions. In fact, she was the one who suggested the creek drawings. Elle, on the other hand, is very outgoing. We met when she approached Caitlin and me at lunch. She asked if she could sit next to us, and after talking for some time, we started to have a really nice time. Though not really a sporty type, Elle is athletics and she works out. I wouldn't call her muscular, but she is fit. People usually find it funny because she is by far the shortest out of the three of us. After seeing my and Caitlin's drawings, she asked us to help her learn how to draw. She was a quick learner. I don't care, I replied. I'm not going into that forest to search for some animal or whatever that killed 17 cats. Of course, it's an animal, Caitlin emphasized. Yeah, but which one? I said, knowing that it was no animal. What if it's a wolf, or maybe even a bear? You can maybe scare a coyote or a jackal off, but a wolf or a bear would devour us without a second thought. It's not a bear, Elle chuckled. But she could be right, Caitlin argued. It could also be a coyote with rabies, which I would say is even worse. You see, I said, looking at Elle. We should still go, Caitlin said. We might find something. Elle didn't say anything. She just looked into my eyes with a victorious grin appearing on her face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but then again, I was the only one who saw the person on the roof. I was the only one stalked in the woods by the same person. I could not describe the terror I felt in the person's presence, and how clearly dangerous they were. But if I told them that, they'd just think that I'm insane. Why should we go? I'd rather not know what animal did it than getting killed by it. I got angry. It's not going to kill you, Elle chuckled. We can defend ourselves, and I'll even bring a gun to scare the animals if it's needed. A gun, Caitlin and I said in unison. Look, Elle, I know this is the US and all of that, but don't you think that people would find 3 teenage girls walking around woods with a gun a bit weird? Caitlin asked. I don't know, but it's better than to be killed by a wolf, Elle answered. And it's even better if we didn't go at all. I tried to stop them. If you're such a little pussy, then you don't have to go with us, Elle replied fiercely. We have been throwing insults at each other since we met, and some of them were much worse than this one. However, all of those were jokes. Elle genuinely thought this and tried to hurt me with it. It worked. The insult itself wasn't that bad, but the fact that she said and meant it destroyed me. Okay, I barely held back tears in my eyes, but I assure you, if you die in that forest, I won't care. You'll be dead to me just like to everyone else. I started to walk away from them when Caitlin stood up and tried to pull me back by grabbing my arm. Come on, girls, she said. We can't fight about this. We're best friends. I'm not so sure about that anymore, I replied, getting my arm out of her grip, and continued walking away. When I came home that day, I immediately went to my room, jumped onto my bed, and started crying. I lost one of my best friends, and since Caitlin stayed with her, I thought I lost her as well. Lucy came and tried to calm me down, and so did my parents. They managed to get some laughs out of me, but they still didn't stop me from crying. Later, I felt like I made them feel useless because their attempts were unsuccessful. I didn't even go downstairs when my brother got back from the search. I could hear him greet us all from the front door, but when I didn't reply, he called out to me. I assumed that my parents told him that I'm in a bad mood at the moment and that he should visit me later. It was around 7:40 p.m. when he knocked on my bedroom door and came in. I had my back turned towards the door and was looking outside through the window. I could hear him sigh and slowly walk up to my bed. He gently sat down right next to my feet. Hey, what's wrong? He asked me. I don't want to talk about it, I replied, turning onto my back and looking at the ceiling. I know you don't, but sometimes stuff like that helps a lot even if we are not sure that they will. I lifted my head just enough to point my eyes at him. He was turned away from me with his head pointed downwards. He put his elbows on his legs, just above his knees, and with his hands, he covered his face. I'd still rather not talk about it, I replied. Not even 24 hours have passed and everything could get fixed by itself. Don't rely on those lies. Nothing can be fixed by itself. You have to act on it, because if you don't, you'll lose an opportunity. And believe me, opportunities are some of the most important things out there. I turned my eyes back toward the ceiling. I've missed many opportunities myself, and I regret it every single day, he said with a truce of sadness in his voice. So, you're saying that I have an opportunity? I asked. I don't understand what you mean by that. If you act on it, you are carving your path. No matter what the outcome is, you'll be responsible for it. If you don't act on it, the universe will carve out a path for you, but you'll never like that path. It will not be your creation, and you will not be proud of it no matter what heights you reach. Sometimes, acting on it can end in a worse situation. However, it is worth the try. There's not much difference between how bad things can be, but trying can achieve you something much, much better. Both of us stopped talking after that. I kept thinking about those words. I remembered some of my missed opportunities and realized how much I hated myself for not trying. There were many opportunities when I had to choose, and I was happy with most of them. Those where I chose poorly, my memories of them are much brighter and happier than those when I have let the opportunity slip out of my hands. What happened in the forest? I asked him after about 10 minutes of silence. "Did you find anything?" "We found 8 more dead cats," he answered. "By this rate, all of the cats in our neighborhood will be gone in about a week and a half." "How is it that fast?" "Because whatever animal is killing those cats, it kills them exponentially. The best example would be 1 cat on the first day, 2 cats on the second, 4 cats on the third day, and so on and so on. It's not exactly exponents of the number 2. It doesn't really seem to have the understanding of exponentials. In translations, it kills randomly. Food doesn't interest it that much since it leaves most of the cats untouched." "Have you found any evidence pointing at what could be doing that?" "No," he replied, turning his head to the right so that he could see me in his periphery. "We found nothing, but most people believe it's a larger jackal or a wolf with rabies. It not leaving footprints must be an astronomically incredible coincidence. What if it wasn't an animal?" He turned his torso to the side and his head towards me. The expression on his face was one of confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked me. "Maybe it was a human. Maybe someone just hates us for, I don't know, not liking the dogs maybe. That doesn't really make much sense. I mean, it might be a person, but your reason is not the best." He stopped to think for a second. "I can suggest the theory to the police chief. I'm sure he heard many stories of young children and teenagers killing animals only to switch to humans later on in their life. And I can tell that it was your idea." "What? Why would you tell him that?" "You can't speak about this to other people." "Why not?" "It's a search. Everything we find is public information unless the police are hiding something from us." "I guess you're right," I told him, sitting up and pulling my legs close to my chest. I hugged them and looked at the bottom of my bed just next to where my brother was sitting. "I need to go now," he told me. "Remember, it's better to take the opportunity than to waste it. Go talk to the girls. If you mess up, you forged a new path, and you'll remember it as a change. If you go talk to them and reconcile, you'll be happy. But if you do nothing, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." I smiled, and only a few seconds later I noticed that he knew about my fight with my friends even though I haven't mentioned it all. "How do you know what happened?" I asked him. "Mom and Dad told me," he said, standing in the doorframe. He winked and left the room, closing the door behind himself. When he left, I took my phone and looked at some pictures of Elle, Caitlin, and me. There were so many moments when one of us is going through hard times and the other two would help her. I reminded myself of all the times when I was crying and the two of them came over to my house with a box of small donuts. We would eat them while crying together and would get better a lot faster. Usually, when something like that would happen, they would sleep over. Around 9 p.m., we all heard our doorbell ring. My parents opened the doors while I stayed in my bed. I could hear them speaking to someone, but I didn't know who they were talking to. Only a minute after the front door closed, I heard knocking on my room's door. It slowly opened and from behind them, Caitlin's face appeared. "Hey," I said, wiping off my tears and sitting straight up. "What are you doing here? I thought you might need someone to talk to." She came in, and I brought some donuts. She smiled, showing me the box. I smiled at her and stood up. After walking up to her, we hugged and I offered her to sit on my bed. "I see you haven't taken this the best," she told me. "I would have taken it much worse. Have you heard from Elle?" "Yes, she's okay. She's sad but managed to keep it in for today. Her extended family was coming over or something, so I can't go visit her after you. Do you think she'll forgive me?" I asked. Caitlin looked into my eyes and then laid down on the bed next to me. As our hair intertwined, she looked at the ceiling. "She'll ask you to forgive her," she chuckled. "She was the one who started it and she knows it." She reacted so explosively because she was afraid for her cat. "Milko disappeared a day ago, and since he was a birthday present from her grandpa, she's really upset about it." "Oh, I didn't even know that. She told me when you left." "Huh." There was silence for a few seconds. "So, everything's going to be all right?" I asked. Caitlin turned her head towards me and smiled. Our eyes connected. "Of course it's going to be okay. But have we not recovered our friendship after bad stuff like this happened?" I smiled back at her. We spent that night talking about various other stuff like TV shows, celebrities, boys, casual teen stuff. I asked her if she wanted to sleep at my place and she called her parents to ask them. They allowed her and I gave Caitlin my pajamas. They were a bit too small but we just laughed it off. We continued our conversation up until we fell asleep. When I opened my eyes, I could only see darkness. Looking around, thanks to the moonlight shining through the window, I could see the outlines of my room. Caitlin was still asleep and I didn't try waking her up. I sat up and checked my phone to see what time it was. It said 2:27 a.m. What the hell was I doing awake that early? I decided to go to the bathroom. Luna was sleeping next to my legs, so when I stood up from the bed, she looked at me. I gave her a kiss on her head and went to the bathroom. When I returned, I expected to find the room exactly how it was before, and I did apart from a small part. Luna was now sitting on the windowsill and looking out into our front yard. I walked up to the window and looked outside. On the street next to the edge of our yard closest to the forest, a cat was standing on all fours with all of its fur pointing up. It was clearly awaiting something to attack it, and it was hissing at the attacker. I just assumed that it was a different cat, and Luna, just like any other cat, hates cats apart from those she grew up with. I was just about to get back into my bed when I got that feeling again. The dread slowly rose in my chest and I started to breathe heavily, awaiting the worst. I could not stop looking outside at the cat. Both Luna and I had our eyes wide open. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a thin clawed hand appeared from behind the fence on the side of my yard. It shot out and grabbed the cat, pulling it behind the fence. It happened in barely 2 seconds and I didn't get the best look at the hand, but I can say that it was long and thin with 5 fingers ending in talon-like claws. Just like on the night of the party, I just froze and didn't know how to react. Luna jumped off of the window and hid under my bed. I stayed standing at the window and looking at the place from where the hand shot out. After 15 minutes of standing there, I snapped out of my trance and got back into my bed. That night was another sleepless one. CATATER, what to do? I was constantly thinking about the arm I saw last night. Spending time in school was incredibly weird. That Wednesday, I'd be looking at the teacher explaining something when suddenly I'd start remembering the cold November night, the terrified stray cat, and the dark monstrous clawed hand illuminated by the moonlight. Just remembering the thin bony structure of the arm and the tightly wrapped shriveled skin, the speed with which it appeared and snatched the cat, and how the next morning I haven't seen even the smallest evidence that whatever possessed that arm was there. There wasn't a single drop of blood, no footprints, no nothing. It was like the arm belonged to a ghost. I still didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't know how to tell Caitlin. I was taking a small pause with Elle, and my brother would just laugh and tell me that I'm imagining things. Maybe I was imagining things, maybe I was dreaming, but it all felt so real. Even Luna was wary of her surroundings when I woke up. But then, I thought about what my brother told me the day before. I can choose to act on it or ignore it. Whatever the outcome of trying is, it will be better than deciding not to try at all. I decided to talk to Elle during a break and reconcile. After that, I'd tell Caitlin and Elle about it. Taylor, my teacher, called with her hands on her hips. Are you following? Yes, of course, I'm following, I answered as anxiety grew inside me. Oh, then you won't have any problem solving this task, she said, holding a black marker and offering it to me. Some of the people looked at me while most couldn't be bothered to do so and barely managed to live through the class. Boredom killed them. I was bored to death every single other time. But this time, all I could do is think about the clawed hand. Nothing else came to my mind. I completely forgot that the teacher told me to get in front of the board and she needed to call me again. Oh, sorry, I told her. I just couldn't sleep last night. I don't really care, she replied. Come here and solve the task. Shakingly, I got up and slowly walked up to the teacher. I gently took the marker from her hand and she crossed her arms, waiting for me to start writing on the board. After taking a quick glance at the marker, I got closer to the board and lifted the marker. The tip of it touched the board when the bell rang, signaling that the class has ended. All the students started packing and I put the marker on a shelf under the board. While passing by the teacher, I felt her eyes on me and I tried getting back to my desk quickly. I put the things in my backpack, put the backpack on my back, and left the classroom. You're so lucky, Caitlin told me. She was waiting for me right outside the classroom, and together, we started walking toward the cafeteria. What did you want to tell us? Caitlin asked me. You and Elle need to hear it at the same time, I answered. I don't know if I'll be able to say it multiple times. The image of the hand appeared in my mind once more. I didn't know if I was thinking about so much due to fear or if whatever it was had that effect on people who saw it. When we got to the cafeteria, we got our food and sat down at one of the tables. Both of us kept looking around, hoping that we'll see Elle. She was nowhere to be found. After a few minutes, we got scared. We approached some of her classmates and asked them if they knew something. Her mom called in. One of the girls replied, Elle's not feeling too good. Caitlin and I looked at each other before thanking the girl and leaving. We returned to the table we were eating at before. There was only one thing left to do. Go to Elle's house after school, or skip school and go there immediately. We decided on the latter. I can only hope she didn't do something stupid, Caitlin told me. She wanted to go to that forest really badly. Do you really think she'd go into the forest alone? I asked, expecting an answer. Yeah, you're right, Caitlin said. No, that's not. It doesn't matter. After we somehow managed to get out, even though our plan was incredibly stupid. There were a few teachers patrolling the hallways. We managed to sneak out through a window in a hallway on the ground floor. We ran to where we left our bikes and jumped onto them. After that, it was pretty easy. We could only ride to Elle's house and hope that she was still there. Caitlin was scared for Elle, even though I haven't told her about the hand. She still thought that it was an animal with rabies, still extremely dangerous. When we got to her house, we turned into her yard and dropped our bikes onto the grass. Caitlin was in front of me, so she was the first one who climbed the front porch and she rang the doorbell. Come on, she said, ringing the doorbell a few more times. What's going on, girls? Elle's agitated mother asked, frustrated after opening the door. Is Elle home? I asked her. She's in her room. After hearing those words leave her mother's mouth, both Caitlin and I sighed with relief. What's wrong? Did something happen at school? Elle's mom asked. No, Caitlin replied. One of the girls just lied to us about her being in a car crash. I finished Caitlin's sentence. The way she said it seemed so real. Yeah, Caitlin confirmed. Why would someone say something like that? Elle's mother continued the conversation. We have no idea, I answered. But can we go see Elle? Of course. Elle's mom completely opened the door and moved to the side to let us pass through. We got in and run upstairs to Elle's room. As we burst in, we saw her laying on her bed and looking at her phone. Her head jerked towards us as soon as the door opened, and the expression on her face was one of surprise and relief instead of fear. Caitlin jumped on her bed and hugged her while Elle kept her eyes focused on me. There was sadness and regret in them, but when I smiled, they changed. What's going on? Elle asked us. We heard that you aren't coming to school today. Caitlin released Elle from her hug. We thought that you went into the forest alone, and we got scared. I saw a smile appear on Elle's face. She was glad to hear that we still cared for her even though we had a fight. No, I didn't. I would never go do something like that without the two of you, Elle replied as her eyes teared up. Caitlin hugged her once more, but this time, Elle returned the hug. While in the hug, Elle motioned with her arm, inviting me into the hug. I climbed onto the bed and hugged them. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was just scared and angry. You don't need to apologize for anything, I told her. You're still my friend. After telling her that, she hugged us harder to the point Caitlin and I couldn't breathe for a second. We gently pushed her off of us and were met with the sight of her smiling. Hey, now that we are all together, you can tell us what you wanted, Caitlin said, looking at me. I froze in place as the joy and happiness turned into fear and disgust. I stood up, took a look through a window, and sat down on a chair next to Elle's desk. I took in a deep sigh. I glanced at Caitlin and Elle before looking down at the floor. I stopped for a few seconds. I saw something yesterday. Something, Elle replied. Can you maybe, elaborate? It was an arm, I answered. An arm that snatched a cat. Elle and Caitlin just sat there. They were silent and didn't know how to react. Even laughing at what I said wasn't on their mind since they knew I was telling the complete truth. I woke in the middle of the night and saw Luna looking outside. I saw a stray on the street and thought she was just looking at it. I went to the bathroom and after returning, I had this feeling. You know how when you have to walk home when it's dark outside and you constantly have a feeling that someone's watching you? Both of them nodded. It's like that, but instead of believing that someone's there, you know it. The fear also feels like it's something primal, like it's a fear of a natural predator and not of another human. It wasn't the first time I felt it, but I'll get to that later. After I returned to my room and experienced that feeling, I walked up to the window and saw the stray hissing at something that was obscured by the fence in my yard. Out of nowhere, a hand appeared from behind the fence, grabbed the cat, and pulled it behind the fence in only a second. This morning, I saw nothing. No footprints, no blood, no nothing. Once more, Elle and Caitlin were silent. They had their eyes on me and were waiting for me to tell them that I'm joking. Please, I said. Please, can you say something? Caitlin and Elle looked at each other and then back at me. We don't know what to say, Elle told me. It sounds like complete bullshit, but judging by how you were speaking, I know you were telling the truth. I took in a breath. Some hair fell over my face, so I pulled it back with my hand and leaned back into the chair. Why didn't you tell me immediately? Caitlin asked me. You were sleeping and I wanted to tell the two of you at the same time, I answered. It was really important since I don't know if I'll be able to speak about it again. I feel it whenever I remember that hand. Sorry, I ask, but did you get a good look at it? Elle asked. Maybe we can recognize who it was. Both Caitlin and I looked at her weirder out. But after hearing what Elle told me, I realized something I didn't realize before. It was such an obvious thing, but somehow, I was so stupid that I didn't even come to that conclusion. I started to breathe faster as my heart started to accelerate. I tried saying. It wasn't human. Elle asked. What the hell are you saying? The hand. It was, very thing with long fingers and claws like talons. I stood up and started to walk back and forth. I don't get how I didn't realize it before, but I inhaled. It was too big to be a human hand. The arm it was attached to was too thin. You know what? Caitlin said. Calm down a bit. I'll bring you a glass of water. After that, you might be able to draw the hand to show us what it looked like. Is that okay? I'll try, I replied. Caitlin got up from Elle's bed and left the room. Elle sat and pulled herself to the edge of her bed. She was close enough to grab my hand with one of hers. Hey, you can calm down, she told me softly. You're safe here. Nothing will happen here, okay? I nodded. Do you remember 2 years ago when we went into my grandma's house and we thought that my grandpa's ghost was haunting us? She chuckled. You remember how I couldn't sleep that night and how you calmed me down by hugging me and constantly telling me that ghosts aren't real? We later found out that it was just possums in the attic running around and making those sounds. However, you still stayed my hero. You protected me when I was scared the most and you stayed with me when I needed you the most. I'll never forget that and will always return the favor. Hearing those words leave her mouth made me smile and calm down a bit. Still, that agonizing fear didn't want to leave me. I was scared of who or what the stalker was before. It wouldn't have been as terrifying if it was a human or an animal since I know how to deal with those. But whatever this thing was, I had no idea how to deal with it. Telling the authorities that a monster has been stalking me or just going to them and telling them that a monster is responsible for the deaths of all those cats. But the worst of all is that judging by the size of the hand, it was more than capable of killing people without even breaking a sweat. By the time Caitlin returned, my heart slowed down and I wasn't breathing as fast. She handed me a glass of water and I took a sip holding it with both of my hands. Elle gave me a blanket even though I wasn't really cold and was already wearing a sweater, but it made me feel safer. The warmth calmed me down and I could hear Elle and Caitlin talking about the hand. They weren't whispering or trying to hide something from me. I just zoned out while looking through the window. What are you talking about? I asked. The hand you mentioned, Elle replied. Yeah, but what about the hand? We're trying to figure out what to do now, Caitlin told me. We can't go into the woods, it's too dangerous. We can't go to the police or our parents since they'll just laugh it off at first. But if we're persistent, they might start to believe we should be sent to a mental institution. We could go to my brother, I told them. I'm not sure, Taylor. I know you and your brother are close and that he's a good person, but I don't think that he'll believe us, Caitlin argued. We stopped to think about who we could turn to for help. After a minute or so, I remembered a name. Terrence, I whispered. What? Elle asked. Terrence, I replied. He's a guy I met at Jessica's party. I can ask her for his Instagram. Why the hell would he want to help us? Caitlin asked. That's the thing. Seeing the hand wasn't the first time I saw whatever it was. In fact, it wasn't the first time I felt its presence. I proceeded to explain the first time I felt the presence in the woods at the rock. When I explained what happened and after the party, they agreed that the best thing we could do is to go talk to Terrence. I immediately texted Jessica asking her if she could send me his Instagram. She replied only 5 minutes later and sent me his profile. She kept suggesting that I liked him and I replied to a few of her messages before completely ignoring her. I sent him a message asking if we could meet him somewhere. He replied half an hour later and asked if meeting him at a McDonald's was okay. I agreed, and when he asked why was this so important, I told him it was about the presence we felt during the party. After telling all of that to Caitlin and Elle, we decided to take Elle's car and go to McDonald's immediately. It was a bit further away from her house, so it would take us just long enough to get there. So, Terrence started. What did you need to tell me? I saw it again, I told him, staring into his eyes. I saw it grab a cat. Why do you keep saying it? It was just a bad person. A stalker probably. Why did you talk to me? You should have gone to the police, he replied, leaning back in his seat and eating one of his fries. Listen to me, I said confidently. It isn't a human. I know it wasn't. The arm was too thin, the hand too large, the fingers too long, and it had huge talons instead of nails. I swear to God, whatever was the owner of that hand, it wasn't human. He kept looking at me and took glances at Elle and Caitlin here and there. We expected his response and slowly ate our fries. Okay, he told me, running his hand down his face. I believe you, I guess. I felt the fear and I admit, it didn't feel like it was just a human, but I have to think logically. Have you seen it anymore? I asked. He looked at me, then at his fries, and sighed. He nodded. I believe I saw it, he told me, keeping his head pointed forward but lifting his eyes towards me. One evening I was doing something in my room. Since my house is next to a forest, I saw the woods after looking through a window. I saw a shape for half a second. It disappeared into the bushes, but I believed it was just me imagining things. Did you feel that fear before looking at the forest? I asked him. No, I felt nothing, he answered. Then it wasn't it. You either saw something else or truly imagined something. But that's not what we're actually here for, I told him. His expression turned to one of confusion. We need your help, Caitlin told him. Now that we know that it's not a human, we don't know what to do. We can't tell the police or anyone else, and we sure as hell aren't able to kill that thing. Terrence stopped to think for a bit before a tiny smile appeared on his face. He leaned towards the table, chuckled, and ate the last of his fries. "I think I might have just the right thing for you," he told us. CATATER, solution found. We followed his car to his house. We drove behind his pickup truck and talked about the situation. He seemed like he wanted to help us, but Caitlin and Elle weren't 100% sure about it. "He was afraid of that thing during the party," I said. "He even drove me home and didn't really try anything." "He drove you home?" Caitlin asked. "He did. I was too afraid to walk home alone, so he offered to drive me since it was on the way to his house," I answered. "If he wanted to do something bad, he would have done it already. You know that psychopaths are smart, right?" Elle replied. "He wouldn't just attack you the first chance he got. He would plan it and find a way which would allow him to attack you without leaving any evidence. He's not a fucking serial killer, Elle. You girls are too scared," I told them. "And how do you know that?" Caitlin argued. "Did you like Bond or something?" "Kinda," I replied. "Fear is the thing that bonds the best." We arrived at his house after about 15 minutes. Compared to where we lived, this looked like a completely different country, where our suburbs were filled with new big houses and are perfectly and tightly arranged to fit with the new and well-organized roads. These houses were spread out with no fence in between them. The roads were old and damaged. They spanned all around and were wavy like snakes. The holes made our car jump a few times, so Elle started avoiding them. On one side, we saw a huge empty field that is used for corn or wheat during the summer. On the other side, there were huge fenced meadows for cattle. The path to Terrence's house was made of a thin layer of gravel that sunk a bit into the dirt below. I knew my mom would be angry at me when she saw that my shoes were dirty. The house was smaller than any of our houses and clearly much dirtier on the outside. The front porch had a rocking chair, but no one was sitting in it. It was a really tall front porch as well. There were 7 wooden steps leading up to it. When we climbed it, I noticed some tools laying on the floor next to the door. It was a shovel, rakes, a hammer, and some other stuff. I guess they didn't really have a place to put them since they didn't even have a garage. They kept their cars under a large tin plate that was connected to the wall on one side and lifted up by 2 long sticks on the other. They had 2 cars, but both were beaten up and old. Upon entering the house, Terrence took off his shoes and put them outside. He told us to do the same and said that they do it only when the shoes get really dirty. None of us minded it since we always took our shoes off when inside. After taking off his shoes, he opened the door, which was immediate to the left after entering the house. It was a bathroom. Its outer wall was coated in wooden plates. The bathroom itself looked old and there were spider webs in its corners. It was so small that only a single person could stand in it, and it would already be too small. We washed our hands one by one before leaving the bathroom. Terrence offered us some slippers, claiming that the floor was cold. To the right of the entrance, there was a doorway and it looked like it led to the kitchen. We didn't really see it too well since we just continued forward after we were done with the bathroom. Right after the bathroom, there was a living room. It was much smaller compared to the ones in suburbs. Its walls were almost completely covered with large windows, of which a few spanned from the bottom of the wall all the way to the top. The rest of the windows were casual, but all of them had those old white knitted curtains decorated by flower-like elements. In the middle of the living room, there was an old couch pointing towards a TV that stood on a small cupboard. There were 2 people sitting on the couch. It was a man and a woman leaning on his shoulder. They were watching some action movie, and I guess they didn't notice that the 3 of us came in with Terrence. Terrence, the man said. "Sup, big bro," he replied. "We have some guests." The man quickly stood up while the woman stopped leaning onto him and looked towards us. After the man turned around, I noticed that he was very similar to Terrence. He was a bit taller but much more muscular. He also had a beard and a man bun. I'm sure that if he had shorter hair and no beard, I would have believed that they were twins. "Hello," he said, offering each of us his hand one by one. "I'm Matthew. This is my girlfriend, Sarah." "Hi," Sarah said and waved at us. I smiled at her and turned back towards Matthew. "So, what brings you here?" he asked us. Before we could respond, Terrence answered the question. "Don't bother them," he said, smiling. "I just took them here to show them the gear. You girls are interested in that stuff?" he asked, surprised. "What did I say, Matt?" Terrence told him. You know me. I'm not really the best at small talk," he chuckled. "Enjoy the tour," he said. He returned to the couch and sat close to Sarah. "If you want anything, you can ask me," Sarah told us. "I live here as well. In fact, I know this place better than these 2 donkeys, even though they lived here their entire life." Yeah, just lie to yourself," Matthew told her. After hearing his response, she smiled and winked at us before turning back around and leaning his head onto Matthew's shoulder. When I turned my head towards Terrence, he was holding the top of his nose with his right hand before putting it down and looking at us. "So, can we go already?" he asked me. "I don't know," I told him. You're supposed to get us there. I heard Matthew chuckle and Terrence looked toward him. Before saying anything, he turned around and walked towards the end of the living room where there was a small hallway to the right. On the right side at the end of the hallway, there was one staircase leading to the first floor and the other leading down to what I assumed to be the basement. Terrence started going down the stairs leading to the basement. On the half floor, the staircase turned 180 and I saw what was at the bottom. An old wooden door. On the wall next to it, there was a tiny hook with keys hanging from it. "Hey, Terrence," I said. "Yeah," he replied. "You live alone? I mean, with Matthew and Sarah. Your parents aren't here?" I asked him. "Yes, my dad is in New York," he said, picking up the keys and trying to find the right one. He needed a job and found one there. It was a bit harder to learn how to live alone, but he sends us the money and Matthew mostly deals with the bills and stuff. He won't have to stay in New York for much longer since Matthew has found a good job and has started working. He'll probably return in a few months." And I realized he didn't mention his mom. "What about your mom?" He stopped searching for the right key before returning to it after a few seconds. She's dead. Caitlin, Elle, and I looked at each other. "Terrence," Caitlin told him. "We're so sorry." "It's okay. You don't have to apologize," he replied. "You didn't know." He found the key and put it in the lock, but before he unlocked the door, he leaned onto the door with his forehead. "It was hard when she died. It was cancer, and we didn't have enough money for the treatment, so she died soon after the cancer was discovered. Even though my dad, Matthew, and I could work in the field, without my mother, who was the only one who knew how to sell it and make good deals, it would mean nothing. We sold the field to some company, and we asked for more money than the field was actually worth. My dad used that money to pay for a small bad flat in New York and found a job. Quite a bit of money was left, which was split between our dad and the two of us for the taxes and everyday needs like food. It happened 5 years ago when I was 14. Matthew was 19 at the time, and he basically became my second dad. After he told us all of that, we stood there in silence. The last thing I expected was to hear Terrence's tragic story. Once more, I looked at Caitlin and Elle. Elle ran down the stairs past me and hugged Terrence. Tears were running down his shoulders, but he stopped himself from breaking down completely. He hugged Elle back. "Terrence," I put my hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry. If you need anything, all of us can help. When it's really bad or you can't sleep, you just need to call us. We'll give you our numbers." He let Elle go and wiped off the tears with the back of his right hand. Thank you," he replied, "but I don't think I'll need it soon." He chuckled and the light that came from the hallway upstairs made his teary eyes sparkle. He returned to unlocking the door, still sniffing because his nose started to run. Elle looked into my eyes while standing at the lowest stair. There was sadness in her eyes and her expression. Her eyes turned towards Caitlin. Terrence opened the door and stepped inside. Elle looked into the basement, but before stepping in, she took another glance at me and Caitlin. I saw the basement light up. The light was weak and yellow, but just strong enough for us to see everything as much as it was needed. Elle went inside, followed by Caitlin, who passed next to me as well. I took in a deep breath and walked down the stairs into the basement. First, I looked to my left and saw not much. Some tools and old stuff. The rest of the basement was mostly empty, with an exclusion of a table opposite the door. When I looked to the right, I saw a wall that ended halfway to the other side. There, I saw Elle and Caitlin standing in awe. I slowly walked up to them and checked what they were looking at over Elle's right shoulder. As soon as I did, I realized what surprised them so much. On the wall at the end of this little open room, there were 1.5 dozen guns. Most of them were hunting rifles, with 4 of them being shotguns and 5 being handguns. "What the fuck?" Elle said. "My dad and grandpa were really into hunting. They tried teaching me and Matthew, and while we ended up being good shots, neither of us liked hunting. Matthew just couldn't handle how much time it took to find something, and I just didn't have a stomach to kill an innocent animal," he explained. "My dad and grandpa didn't really mind that, but they joked about it constantly." Terrence smiled. "Who was the best of you?" Elle asked him. "Oh, definitely Matthew. He was a phenomenal shot," he smiled. "That's not to say that we were bad. I was also very talented." "We shall see about that," Elle told him. "What?" He grinned. "We need to practice if we are going to hunt this thing, right? Let's make it a bit more fun. Let's make it a competition," she offered. "That's a good idea," he replied. "Have you shot from a gun before?" He asked her. "Have I shot from a gun before?" She laughed out loud. "I don't know if there's a gun I haven't shot out. My dad is really into it and took me since I was young," she told all of us. "I'm going to wreck your shit," she told Terrence. "Do you two know how to shoot?" Terrence asked the two of us. Caitlin and I shook our heads left and right, and he smiled. "Doesn't matter," he told us. "We'll teach you. 2 teachers, 2 students. How about we compete in that as well? We'll train them, and after some time, we'll put them to a test." "Agreed," Elle told him, offering him a hand. Terrence grabbed Elle's hand and they shook on the competition. "We're starting now," Terrence said, taking a hunting rifle and a shotgun off of the wall. He handed them to Elle. She grabbed them by the barrels and moved away. Terrence gave Caitlin and me a handgun each and took another hunting rifle and a shotgun off of the wall. "There's a shooting course behind the house. I'll take you there, but first, we need to take some beer cans," he told us. "We'll bring the guns there and I'll return for the empty cans." He put the strap of the hunting rifle over his shoulder and with his empty hand, he put cartridges of all the ammo we need in a small purse and picked it up. The three of us followed him while carrying the guns he gave us. When we climbed up the stairs, I noticed the door on the opposite side of the hallway. I don't know how I haven't noticed it before since it had a large portion of it made of glass. The light from the outside shined inside even though the sky was a bit cloudy. I reckoned we had about an hour before the rain started. We put the stuff next to the back door and returned to the front door to get our shoes. "Matthew, we're going to shoot a bit," Terrence said while passing next to the living room. "Okay, but be careful," Matthew responded. "We might join you a bit later. I don't need you to boast more," Terrence told him. After we put our shoes on, Terrence took the shotgun and the bag with his left hand and he used his right hand to open the back door. They creaked a bit and just by looking at them, I realized it was old wood almost rotten and so light that even a weak punch could do serious damage to them. After I stepped outside, I was amazed by the view. The back porch was literally identical to the front porch, elevated above the ground with exactly the same number of steps leading up to it. The only thing missing was the rocking chair and the tools. If you asked me, I would have put both on the back porch. The view was much better and no one could see the tools. The backyard spanned far away and ended where the field started. To the right, about 100 meters away, the first line of forest trees made you feel like the house was secluded just enough. In the distance, behind the vast fields of dirt, you could barely see the tree line where the fields ended and the forest started. Or, well, continued. Depends on how you see it. "Hey, Terrence," I called after him. He was already putting the guns and the ammunition that stood in the yard. There were a few sticks laying on the ground next to it. They were organized in a long line. On the edge of the yard, there stood about 10 logs with some bullet marks on them. It was clear that we would be shooting at the cans placed on those logs. "Yes?" he asked, looking at me. Elle and Caitlin were already next to him and putting the guns he gave them on the table. He started walking back into the house to get the empty cans. We met each other at the steps and standing very close, we looked into each other's eyes. I was mesmerized for a second. "How long is the yard? I mean, what is the distance between the porch and the field?" "Oh," he said, looking towards the field. "It would be about 200 feet that way." He pointed to his right. "About 150 feet that way," he said, pointing behind me over my shoulder, "and about a 100 or so feet towards the forest." I stared into his eyes. "Thank you, no problem." He smiled and climbed up the stairs. I followed him with my eyes and after he disappeared inside the house, I took in a deep breath. I walked off of the porch with a big smile on my face. Caitlin and Elle walked closer to me and we stopped around halfway between the porch and the table. "What the hell was that?" Caitlin said, clearly filled with joy. "I don't know." I smiled and took in a deep breath. "I don't know, but I loved it." "I'm sure he did as well," Elle said before squealing. "I'm so happy for you." She hugged me. "He clearly likes you." "I know," I replied. We heard the old door behind us open and all three of us looked at them at the same time. Terrence was pulling a large trash bag behind him. It was completely full of cans. He stopped to wipe the sweat off of his forehead and continued dragging the bag behind him. He seemed like he completely ignored or didn't understand what happened on the porch stairs. Even before I noticed it, I started to feel anxious and my face started to turn red. I believe I somehow played that smoothly, but I didn't know how the hell I did it. This was the first and only time in my life I flirted with someone and I did it subconsciously. "Okay, I'll put 3 cans on each log," he told us. "We have more than enough cans and bullets. If all of us try shooting at each can 20 times, we would still have bullets left." My dad and grandpa were always a bit too enthusiastic while buying the guns and bullets. He started to load the guns and Elle asked to help him. He allowed her and was genuinely surprised when she knew how to do it. He loaded the 2 handguns Caitlin and I brought up and put them on the table with their safety still on. After loading the guns, he dragged the bag of cans to the logs and put 3 on each of the logs. If you ask me, I'd say that it was a bit stupid to load the guns before putting the cans in their places. "So, what gun are we trying first?" he asked Elle after returning to the table. She replied by putting her finger on her chin and making a cartoonish thinking face. "I'd say that the best choice is to start with the easiest. Let's start with the rifles, if you want." So, he smiled. A magazine carries 9 bullets, so you try to shoot at cans from left to the right. If you miss, you continue shooting until you get that can. If you miss the can you're aiming at, but hit a different one, it doesn't count. Let's do this, she replied. Girls go first, he said as a friendly grin appeared on his face. Terrence offered the gun he loaded to Elle and she took it from his hands. After lifting it properly and nesting it properly at her shoulder, with her right arm, she gripped the rifle near the trigger and pointed the gun toward the cans. Remember, we go from left to right, Terrence told him. Yeah, Elle replied cockily. I could hear her taking a deep breath before calming down and gently pressing the trigger just enough so that it didn't shoot. She exhaled and immediately after that, she pulled the trigger. The shot rang out through the air, and I had to cover my ears. I inhaled through my teeth as the pain appeared in my ears. Fuck, Terrence shouted. I forgot the ear protection. He ran inside while Elle, Caitlin, and I were trying to recover from the loud sound. The ringing stayed for a bit more. Honestly, I thought it would be much worse than it actually was. When Terrence returned with 6 headphones-looking things, he gave each of them to one of us and the other 2 he put on the table. By the way, Elle, good shot, he said after seeing that the first gun was missing. How could have you forgotten this? She asked him. I was excited. I had never done this with any of my friends before. But you also claim that you go to shooting ranges. You should have remembered as well. Hey, I said. It doesn't matter who's wrong. We can just continue wearing the protection and everyone will be fine. All 3 of them looked at me with a confused smile. Why? I started before realizing it. Oh, yeah, ear protection. That's it. Terrence chuckled and shook his head before putting on the ear protection and showing thumbs up to Elle. She pointed the gun towards the cans once more and aimed at the next one. The second and third shots missed, the fourth she hit, and the fifth was a miss. 6th, 7th, and 8th all hit while the last one hit, but it was a wrong can. Really? Terrence asked. I thought you'd be better, he told her. Well, I've never shot out of this type of gun, she told him irritated. Yeah, he smiled while taking the gun from her hands. He loaded it and stopped at the same exact spot Elle was standing in before him. He lifted the rifle and started aiming. It took him much less to prepare for the shot. I saw him inhale and exhale deeply before he took a shot. The first one went right through a can he was aiming at. The second and third shots connected with the cans as well. He missed the 4th, 5th, and 6th shots. He took another deep breath as the chances of him winning narrowed down. After a few seconds, he fired the 7th shot with took the right can down. After another deep breath, he missed the next can before trying the 9th time. The 9th shot connected with the can he was aiming at and it evened their score out. Really? Elle asked. I thought you'd be better, she told him. Was it a tie? Caitlin asked. Yeah, Terrence answered. Somehow, it was. He took a look at the gun and then at the cans. What is it? Elle asked him. You can't handle not being first. No, he answered. I used to be much better. I even managed to get 7 out of 9 last week. Maybe it's the weather, Elle chuckled. Doesn't matter, he replied. Who are you going to mentor? He asked her. While he was looking at the cans, Elle took a look at me with a big grin on her face. Then she looked at Caitlin and nodded. I'll take Caitlin, Elle answered. She just seems like she'll be better. She winked at me. Eat shit, Elle, I joked. Okay, Terrence replied, turning around. Which gun are we starting with? I think we should start with the rifles, Elle told him. I find them the easiest. Elle and Terrence showed us how to load a gun. It took us quite a bit longer than them to fill up the magazines, but I was sure that we would get the hang of it after trying it a few more times. They showed us how to aim properly and fixed our forms. I could feel Terrence's hands grip my arms and gently push them into the right positions. His grip was just strong enough to show his strength and soft enough to show his tenderness. After fixing my right arm, he stepped behind me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, fixing my aim. After he was finished, he noticed some hair that fell over my face and removed it with his fingers, taking a deep breath and then let it all out slowly. He told me, it will calm you down. I did as he said. The air passed through my nose and entered my lungs. I felt the smell of the grass wet from the previous rains. After I exhaled, I felt my heart calm down and I focused only on the target. It took me a few seconds to pull the trigger. As my chest filled with uneasiness because of the shot, I decided to just do it. I pulled the trigger and heard the muffled sound of the shot. My right shoulder, on which I leaned the gun, jerked backward a bit, but I managed to hold it in place. The adrenaline grew in me and I started breathing fast. I could feel my ribcage spread and shrink as I tried to realize if I managed to hit the can or not. You did it, Terrence shouted from behind me. You hit the can. What? You hit the can? He shouted. I looked back towards the logs and realized that there was one can missing. I was so happy that I screamed and jumped. After turning around, I expected Terrence to hug me, but he just gave me a high five and told me I did well. Caitlin missed her first shot, but she hit the second. For the next 40 to 30 minutes, we shot at the cans. I managed to hit a few more and Caitlin did as well. Elle and Terrence told us that it was good for the first time. Terrence even had to go put up new cans. Suddenly, we heard the door behind us open, and as we turned around, we saw Matthew leaving the house. He slowly walked up to the steps leading to the back porch and leaned on the porch fence. "Go inside, now," he told us. "It will rain soon. We'll be inside soon," Terrence told him. "We need to knock down all the cans." "Okay, then," he said and started to slowly walk up to us. When he got to the table, he took a handgun and loaded it. He walked up to me and stopped right next to me. He lifted the gun with only one hand and started shooting. The cans went down one by one as he wasted the bullets. With the 12 shots he fired, he managed to knock down 12 cans. Only 2 were left standing, but the only reason they weren't knocked down was because he had no more bullets. Matthew walked up to the table and put the handgun on it. "You should pick up the cans, Terrence," Matthew told him. "We shouldn't leave them outside." "And why wouldn't you do it?" Terrence responded. "I'll put the guns away," Matthew answered. "You 3 can stay for dinner if you want." He smiled. "Sarah made the food and it's amazing. We'll just have to tell our parents," Elle said. "Great," Matthew replied. "You can go inside if you want. Just take off your shoes before you do." We walked up the back porch and took our shoes off before stepping inside the house. We walked up to the front door and left them there. I knew my parents would be angry at me for skipping school since they probably got the message that I didn't appear in the last few classes. They didn't really fear where we were since they knew I'd only hung out with Elle and Caitlin, and they knew that I wouldn't do anything dangerous. However, this is an extreme case. I have a stalker, and on top of that, it isn't even human. "Hey, you staying for dinner?" Sarah asked us in her sweet, tired voice. "We have to," I smiled. "Matthew told us that you are an amazing cook." She smiled back and pointed toward a dining table in the kitchen. "You can sit down," she told us. "I'll join you soon. I just have to go to the bathroom." "Thank you," we told her. The table had 6 chairs, 2 chairs on each of its longer sides and 1 on each of its shorter ones. Each of us sat on one of the chairs. Caitlin and I sat on the wider side while Elle sat on the shorter one. "Okay, this was really weird," Caitlin told us. "What?" Elle replied, elongating the word. "They seemed pretty nice to me, and we had fun, didn't we?" She smiled. "I know that, but Terrence invited us and just like that and Matthew didn't even care." Caitlin argued. "They're literally just 2 guys living alone," I replied. "They don't really get visitors, I assume." Also, Matthew probably assumed that Terrence knew us for a longer time. When it comes to Terrence himself, it's clear that he has the same goal as we do. "My goal isn't getting into your pants," she replied. "Oh, come on, Kat," Elle said. "Don't be so skeptical. They're good people. Are you going to tell that to yourself after we are murdered?" Caitlin protested. "Who is going to murder you?" I asked her, almost laughing. "Don't be like that," Elle told her. "You know that everything's okay with these people. If they wanted to, they could have killed us already." Caitlin was clearly unhappy that we had a different opinion of her. She crossed her arms and looked away from us. Elle and I decided to talk to her later since we believed she needed a little space. Only a minute after we were finished with our conversation, Sarah came back into the kitchen and sat down opposite Elle. This meant that the 2 seat on the wide side opposite Caitlin's and my side. I hoped that Terrence would sit opposite me. Terrence was the first to come. He hid all the cans somewhere and joined us at the table. Just like I wished, he sat down opposite me. He even gave me a smile while bending down. Matthew was the last to come. He was a bit wet from the rain and he wiped his face with his hand. He took a bottle of water out of an old fridge in the corner of the room and he drank from it. "We're waiting for you, babe," Sarah told him. "Oh, sorry," he smiled. "I forgot." He put the water back into the fridge and sat down by the table. "Bon appetit," Sarah said, smiling. She made some sort of a stew and at first glance, it didn't look that tasty. However, after I tried it, I could not get enough of it. It was probably the best food I have ever tried. Caitlin and Elle were amazed by the food as well, and I knew Caitlin wasn't against this family after trying the stew. I asked Terrence to pass me a salad at one point, and while he was giving it to me, our hands touched. I gave him a flirty smile, but he returned an uncomfortable one. It honestly surprised me a bit, but I assumed he was just shy around Matthew and Sarah. When we were finished with dinner, we talked for a short time before leaving. Matthew told us to come back again, and Terrence clearly enjoyed our company. Sarah, of course, loved hearing us compliment her stew and took a liking to all 3 of us. We also had to practice shooting if we wanted to go hunt that thing. "It was a really nice day," Elle said with a big smile on her face. "I'm almost sad that it finished," she said, putting her arms on the wheel of the car. "We'll visit them again," I told her while sitting next to her. "We need to learn how to shoot if we want to go hunt that monster down. But you also have an alternative reason to come here," Caitlin said, gently punching me in the shoulder. "I don't know," I replied. He seemed kinda hesitant during the dinner. And while we were shooting, bullshit, Elle told me. He definitely likes you and he knows you like him. Maybe it's the age difference, Caitlin suggested. I mean 2 years ain't much, but still. He's 19 and you're 17. I've heard and seen much worse, Elle told us. This is nothing. He's probably just very shy. It took us 15 minutes to get back to the town and Elle dropped me off first. I told them goodbye after leaving the car and said that I'll text them about when we would be meeting the day later. After I watched Elle drive off and disappear behind a house at the end of the street, I turned around and started walking towards the front door. I stopped in front of them, took in a deep breath, and rang the doorbell. Where have you been? My mom shouted immediately after opening the door. With Caitlin and Elle, I answered. You don't have to worry. I don't have to worry, she asked surprised. There's a rabid animal running around the forest and it could possibly jump out at you any second and I shouldn't worry. Yeah, I replied. I can defend myself and Caitlin and Elle would certainly be more than able to help me. I was focused on my mom, so when I got into the kitchen, I didn't even realize what was waiting for me. As soon as I turned around, I saw my brother and my dad sitting by the table and Lucy was sitting between them. She was sobbing and her face was completely red and covered in tears. I stopped due to the shock caused by the difference in the atmosphere I felt. My brother and dad were clearly trying to calm down Lucy, but it wasn't going too well. As soon as Lucy saw me, she stood up and ran up to me. She hugged me tightly and I slowly and gently returned it. I placed a kiss on top of her head and looked back at my dad and my brother. My dad covered his face with both of his hands. We found Bunny. He sighed, dead. After crying with her for about an hour, I went to my room. Lucy needed to be alone for a bit. While crying, I heard my phone buzz. After taking a look at it, I saw that it was Terrence calling the WhatsApp group we made earlier. Hello, I said after answering. Taylor, Terrence replied, taking in deep and scared breaths. I saw it. He didn't even have to specify what he meant by it. By the time I gathered myself, Elle and Caitlin were already in the call and talking to Terrence. What does it look like? Elle asked him. I can't see it too well. It's just a silhouette, he answered. There are no lamps on the street so I can't see anything. Okay, Caitlin said frantically. Can you describe the silhouette then? Human-like, he said before stopping to think for a second. But it sometimes walks on all fours and sometimes on 2 legs. It looks really, like, malnourished, I guess. It's incredibly skinny, and it keeps sniffing the ground. The head looks terribly off. It's longer and it looks like it has a snout instead of a nose. Try hiding somewhere, I told him. I don't know. You probably can take a gun, but don't try hunting it. We don't know how. Before I could finish my sentence, I heard Terrence gasp. I immediately stopped talking and waited to hear his response. What happened? Elle asked him. It saw me, he replied, letting out a few deep breaths. It was sniffing the ground and then it turned its head towards me. None of us replied. We didn't know what to tell him. The creature was there, in front of his house, and it saw him. We assumed that it would try to break in or something, and judging by what I saw before, it would have no problem breaking in and destroying the whole house before finding everyone that lives there and murdering them all. CATATER, we are ready. I can hear its footsteps, Terrence told us. On the front porch, it's sniffing the house. Be quiet, Caitlin told him. Don't say a word. We sat there in silence waiting for any sound to come from Terrence's phone. I was sure that it was able to break down the door and kill Terrence as well as his brother and Sarah. I have never felt such fear and anxiety before, and I wish that I have never felt it. It was just so uncomfortable to the point I was becoming dizzy and walking back and forth as Luna followed me with her gaze. It's leaving, Terrence said after a grueling 5 minutes. There were another few seconds of silence before Terrence continued. I can barely see it, he said. It's walking away on all fours. The next morning, he checked his front yard. Despite seeing what he saw the night before, he could not find any footprints. Just grass and gravel looking the same they did before. 4 days have passed since that incident, just as much as since the bunny's body was found. How he got outside, nobody knows. What we do know, however, is that he was one of the 47 cat deaths in those 4 days. This situation was becoming more than just crazy. 3 other searches were started, but no one found anything. From the 24th of October, 2018, when all of this started, to the 18th of November, 2018, only I have seen the true killer. Some people felt it, but none of them saw it or felt it follow them. In fact, even I didn't see it completely. I saw its shape on the roof of Jessica's house and I saw the clawed hand. But other than that, I saw nothing. People started to believe that it wasn't an animal killing their pets. The authorities tried so hard to prove that it was just a rabid animal, but no one believed it. They all thought it was a human who did it, to protect their pets, but also to prove that they are right. People started to not let their cats out of their homes. They hoped that no one would break in. But if there were no cats outside, someone so thirsty for cat blood would probably find a way to break into people's houses. That way, they'd prove that it was a human, but at the cost of her pets. Unfortunately, nothing else could be done. Well, we could do something else, and Elle, Caitlin, Terrence, and I were preparing for it. We bought some hunting equipment like bear traps, camo gear that was warm enough for the cold weather, proper boots, and some other stuff. Terrence also went to a local butcher and got some meat. At first, he was hesitant, but we told him that if anyone asks him something, he should just say that his family is having a big celebration. We also bought a transport cooler for the meat. And to top all of that, Caitlin got a phenomenal idea. She offered to buy motion detect night vision cameras and suggest we put them in a few different places in the woods. It would alert us of the monster's presence if it ever showed up, and we would know where it is. She would be the one paying for the cameras and would be able to connect them to her laptop and tablet. Matthew somehow found out what we were trying to do. I assumed that he found the cooler filled with meat Terrence was supposed to hide. Terrence explained that after a lot of arguing and explaining from his side, Matthew reluctantly decided to help us. He knew the forest really well, and he was the best hunter among any of us. His knowledge and abilities are beyond useful to our operation. Our plan was to put up cameras one day and set up a trap after a few days. We would stay up overnight since it seems like the night is when the monster is the most active. Caitlin and Sarah would stay in the car from where they could watch the cameras. The rest of us would be sitting in pairs in small hunting towers nearby. It was a great plan, and unlike in the movies, we wouldn't really be separated. We wouldn't be even a minute running away from each other, and all of us would be packed with firearms and hunting knives. Matthew doesn't look too happy, I said while we were pulling into their backyard. I don't think I'd be happy in his place as well, Elle told me. How would you feel if Lucy just suddenly brought 3 people into their home, taught them to shoot, and decided to go monster hunting? I guess you're right, I replied. Caitlin was just sitting behind me in silence. She was looking through the window. Her cat Derry was found split in half with her guts spilled all over the floor around the corpse. Caitlin really liked that cat, almost as much as I loved Luna. I moved Luna's food and water bowl into my room, and mostly I didn't even let her out of the room unless I was leaving it as well. Lucy started to care for Darkness much more, and she usually hugged her while crying. Darkness didn't mind her attention so much. It seemed like it enjoyed it. My brother left back for college, and even if he wanted to take Darkness with him, he couldn't. The dorm didn't allow any pets. When we got out of the car, Matthew took the cigarette out of his mouth and stubbed it out in an ashtray standing on the fence of the front porch. Terrence was sitting on the porch stairs and sharpening one of the hunting knives. Sarah was sitting in the rocking chair. When we got out of Elle's car, she jumped off of the chair, waved at us, and smiled. Whose idea was it to hunt down this monster or whatever the hell you saw? Matthew asked. Mine was to ask Terrence, I replied. Terrence's was to hunt it down. Matthew took a look at Terrence while leaning on the rail. I hope you know what you're doing, little bro, Matthew said seriously. Otherwise, we are pretty fucked. He took a step backward. After he picked up a rifle and the bag with the cameras, he walked down the porch stairs. The rest of us just kept standing then, and when he realized it, he stopped and turned around. Are you going or what? He asked. I'm not doing this without you. Terrence stood up and put the strap of his rifle around his shoulder. They were carrying those rifles just as a precaution. If something comes running at us, we can scare it or kill it. Depends on what it is. Elle and Sarah followed them and started a quiet conversation. When Terrence got to Matthew asked him something, and they started walking towards the forest together. I turned around to take a look at Caitlin. Hey, are you okay? I asked her. Yeah, I'm good, she answered with a small fake smile. I'm just distracted a bit. If it helps, you're not going through this alone, I told her. As you know, Bunny was also found dead. I know, she said, looking right into my eyes. But that's not what will make me feel better. The only thing that will make me feel better is seeing the monster that did this dead. I chuckled. That's the spirit, I said. Let's go. Caitlin brought her tablet and laptop so that she could connect the cameras and mark the important places on a map. There was this program she found on her laptop which allowed you to connect to the cameras and show you where they are on a map. You could also mark some places, and so she did. She marked where the hunting towers were, and she marked the place where the car would be. I also brought my tablet so that she could do the same with it. We decided that Caitlin and Sarah would be using the laptop while the 2 other pairs will be using the tablet since they are easier to carry around. It wasn't too hard to find good places for the cameras, but the problem was setting them up. Out of the 8 of them that we had, we needed to set 6 of them higher on a tree and point them toward the ground. Matthew and Terrence climbed those trees and set up the cameras about 17 feet above the ground. The cameras had a perfect view of the ground. The other 2 cameras were set up in bushes. They were hidden in such a way that they gave us a perfect view of the surrounding area, but they were well hidden. You wouldn't be able to see it just by looking at the bush, but if you'd move the leaves away, you'd see it immediately. We hoped no one would do that. After the cameras were set up, Caitlin checked all of them once more on her laptop. The cameras could turn to sides as well as up and down. You could also zoom in and switch between the normal and night mode. They were always on and you'd be alerted when one of them detected movements. A message would come to your device accompanied by a single clicking sound. It was so perfect for this situation that it basically felt like it was made for it. While walking back to Terrence's house, Matthew led the group. About 15 feet behind him, Terrence strolled while looking around at nature. He liked nature, and I assumed it was another reason why he hated when his dad took him hunting. Shooting from a gun was one thing, but using it to kill an animal was completely different. I noticed him smiling as he moved his head left and right. I was walking about 20 feet behind him, alone. I wanted to be by myself so that I could listen to the silence of nature. However, I also wanted to find a way to approach Terrence and talk to him by myself. Suddenly, something came over me and I decided to run up to him. "Hey," I told him. "Hi," he replied nervously. "What's up?" I asked. Not much really," he answered, looking away. "I'm preparing for hunting a monster I haven't really seen and I'm not 100% sure is actually real. Other than that, pretty normal day for me, I guess." "Wow," I chuckled. "That sounds really fun," I joked. "But seriously now, I swear to God and everything I hold dear, the monster is real. It exists." He looked into my eyes, but the smile on his face was gone. "I believe you," he told me. "No matter how much I'd like that you were wrong or lying, I believe you. You know that I felt its presence as well, and it tickled this part of my soul. It made me realize that true evil exists in this world and I'm afraid to face it." We were silent for a few seconds. "But I'm happy that I'm facing it with someone who understands it as well," he said, looking away from me. "I don't know if it will be easier or harder that way or if we will even survive." "Don't say that," I replied immediately. "We'll survive." He took a glance at me and smiled. "Hey, when all of this is over and we go back to our normal lives, do you maybe think that we could, go out for food or something sometimes?" I asked him with a hint of hesitation and anxiety. Why yeah," he replied, completely dumbfounded. "We could go for some, food, I guess." "Great, hey Matt, wait up. I have to ask you something." He cut me off. "Sorry, Taylor, I just remembered something important. Talk to you later, okay?" he asked, already halfway between me and Matthew. "Oh, okay," I replied, stopping in the middle of the path. I looked as he ran up to Matthew and started talking to him. I knew he had nothing important to talk to Matthew about. He just wanted to avoid me exclusively. Why the hell would he want to do that? Did I do something wrong? As I was standing there and not moving, Elle, Caitlin, and Sarah walked up to me. Caitlin and Elle gave me sympathetic looks, which was basically like telling me that there are other fish in the sea. It didn't help because as their best friend, I expected some words of encouragement from them. At least from Elle. Caitlin was already having a really bad time because of her cat's death, but Elle could have done something to help me. "Hey, are you okay?" Sarah asked. "Yeah," I replied, still standing in place. "I'm just thinking about something. Do you think I'm stupid?" She chuckled. "I know you like Terrence. I saw how you had your eyes on him the first time we met. Is it that obvious?" I asked her. "It was to me, but I don't know about Matthew," she told me. "Matthew's a bit complicated. He doesn't see what he doesn't really care about. He doesn't care about Terrence." I asked her, surprised. No, she started walking. "He loves Terrence and he wants him to be happy. He doesn't really care who Terrence is happy with as long as he is happy." "Oh," I followed her. "So, do you know why Terrence doesn't like me? Did I do something wrong? Did he tell you something? Please, tell me if you know something," I begged. "Calm down," she told me before taking a look at Terrence. "I know something, but if I tell you, you have to promise me not to tell anyone." "I won't," I replied immediately. "Please, just tell me. I promise I'll keep quiet." I was desperate. "Well, I don't really know how to say this, but..." She sighed. I could not wait for her to tell me what it was. I felt like my head was going to explode, and at the same time, it felt like she was going to reveal this amazing but to me heartbreaking truth. "Well, he doesn't like girls." She looked at me expecting a reaction. "What the hell are you trying to?" I stopped as soon as the realization hit me. Yup," she confirmed. "I feel a bit better now, I guess. I believed I was not good enough before," I told her. "Yeah," she elongated the word. "It's been really hard on him, you know. He never believed that anyone would accept him even though the times are changing." "Does Matthew know?" I asked. As I said, Matthew doesn't care who Terrence is happy with. He just wants Terrence happy. He's a good brother, an amazing brother, and an even better boyfriend." She smiled. "Look, I love Terrence, but he would have been a terrible boyfriend." "Why?" I asked. He's very untidy, reckless, and very careful with his money. He mostly spends time just in the forest, just sitting around or doing some stuff in his room. I don't know what he's doing there and I don't want to know. He's so clearly not boyfriend material, judging by some this and some other stuff. Well, I believe that he'd be an amazing boyfriend, I told her. You're just saying that because you like him. No, I replied, smiling. Both of us laughed out loud and continued walking after the rest of the group. I didn't get a boyfriend that day, but I found a really good new friend. After we returned to the house, Caitlin checked the cameras on the tablets and the laptop once more to be completely sure that everything was working properly. Sarah offered us to stay for dinner, but we refused. We said we didn't want to impose on them. We sat in Elle's car and drove away. What the hell happened with Terrence? Elle asked me. Did he try to avoid you? I guess so, I replied. Why would he avoid you? She asked. I have no idea, I lied. Should I try doing something about it? No, I said quickly. Don't talk to him about it at all. I'll handle it. I mean, it's just not right. You're trying hard to get him to like you and he isn't even telling you anything. It would even be better if he told you that he just doesn't like you, she said before taking a look at Caitlin through her rearview mirror. What do you think, Caitlin? What? She jumped. What do I think about what? You know what? Never mind, Caitlin, Elle told her. I was looking if you're here with us. Your silence made me think you're dead. Oh, Caitlin replied and leaned back at the window staring outside. Look, Taylor, I love you. You're my best friend and I don't want you to get hurt, Elle told me. Maybe I am being a bit aggressive, I guess. However, everything I do is because I want to help you. But if you want me to do nothing, you just have to tell me. I don't want you to do anything, Elle, I told her. Everything is okay. We were silent the rest of the ride. Caitlin kept looking outside and thinking about something. I assumed it was just about her cat, but there could have been something she wasn't telling us. Elle thought that she overstepped her boundaries with me and stayed silent, believing that I didn't want to talk to her. She was kind of right. The thing was that I didn't mind it that much, and I just thought about Terrence. How didn't I realize it? To think back on it, the only hint he ever gave me is standing close to me. But even then, it was just because the stairs weren't that wide. Elle stopped in front of my house around 6:30 p.m. My parents went to dinner at their friend's place while Lucy and I stayed at home. I found Lucy in her room. She was laying in her bed and silently crying while hugging Darkness. I laid down next to her with Darkness in between us. I gently pet Darkness on her head and she closed her eyes. It made Lucy smile while still crying. I felt Luna jump onto the bed next to my legs and she slowly walked up to Lucy. She snuggled and right up to her chest so that Lucy would pet her instead of Darkness. It made Lucy chuckle. They know when you feel bad, I told her. They can sense it somehow and will come to you to make you feel better. She started to pet Luna as Luna tried to find a perfect position to sleep in. Do you want me to order pizza for dinner? I asked her. I have some money in my wallet. Lucy nodded with a smile and turned her eyes back towards Luna. As I stood up, Darkness just opened her eyes slightly before closing them again. Luna, on the other hand, lifted her head and looked at me wide-eyed. She meowed at me. Stay here, Luna, I said, leaving the room. I didn't see Luna following me, so I assumed she just stayed there. After I got to the phone, I called a local pizzeria and ordered some food. Since I'd be waiting for about half an hour, I decided to sit on the couch, turn on the TV as a background, and spend time on my phone. I used to scroll through Instagram and sometimes even Reddit looking at animals or stuff about celebrities, and almost nothing could ever distract me from watching the phone until that time. Breaking news, the reporter said on TV while I was scrolling through Instagram. I immediately sat straight up since I already knew it was about the monster I saw. I don't know whether I was filled more with fear or with the need to know what happened. 7 people have returned to their homes after being done with their job only to find their houses completely trashed. Everything destroyed, one of their windows broken. However, that wasn't the worst part. Nothing was stolen from their homes. Instead, they found their pets brutally murdered by some animal, the reporter exclaimed. Again with the animal, the authorities did not want to say that it wasn't an animal no matter how much evidence there was to support the claim. That thing was no animal, and even if most people didn't believe that it was a monster, most of them knew that it had to be a human at least. But those weren't all the news. Police have also found remains of 2 people who were murdered just as brutally as the animals, the reporter said. She proceeded to explain their appearance, and one of the victims was immediately recognized by one of the cops. It was an 18-year-old guy who disappeared in New Mexico in early 2017. The other one was a woman in her 40s who it took the authorities a bit longer to identify. We got no answer about her identity that day. However, the day after, on the 19th of November, 2018, she was identified as a woman who went missing in France in 2006. How the hell did the two of them end up in my state so much time after their disappearance? No one knew. But for me, Caitlin, Elle, Sarah, Terrence, and Matthew, it only meant one thing. We needed to prepare a lot, and we did. We trained much more and even decided to put out the meat a day earlier. We decided to put the meat in bear traps on the 20th of November and spend the night between the 20th and 21st of November waiting for the creature to show up. All the cameras were set up in such a way that would alert us when we needed to get ready. We decided to put up the traps near the towers and even a few without meat around the car. It would give Sarah and Caitlin a bit more protection. They'd be carrying guns as well, but wouldn't be the ones initiating a fight with the monster. Those would be us. The 19th of November passed like any other day, and the 20th of November came just like that. I woke up early, had my breakfast, and went to school. There, I went through the plan with Elle and Caitlin once more. We needed to be 100% sure that this plan would work since the creature has now clearly demonstrated its capability to kill humans. I assumed that the French woman and the guy from New Mexico were the victims of the creature, but I didn't know how they showed up there. It didn't matter in the end. Elle, Caitlin, and I all sent messages to the school saying that we were feeling bad due to some bad food we ate the day before. All three of us used our mom's emails. Since our moms weren't too knowledgeable in technology, we easily tricked them. We told them that they need to update the Gmail app on their phone and sent those messages. How we tricked our mothers into believing that we went to school. Well, we just left our houses at the time we usually did to get to school. Elle picked us up and we went straight to Terrence's house. We talked, we shot, we revised the plan, we checked the cameras. We did whatever we could do to pass the time, but the dread from the idea that we would be meeting that monstrosity, I reignited that primal dread in my heart. Around 8 p.m., we set out into the forest. We took Terrence's pickup truck and drove to the destination where Sarah and Caitlin would spend the rest of the night. When we stopped in the right place, all of us exited the car and took what we were supposed to. We decided that Terrence and I would be stationed at one of the towers while Matthew and Elle would be stationed at the other. Both of us took 3 bear traps and 3 pieces of meat. The pieces of meat were light enough not to trigger the bear traps, and it was a perfect bait. We said goodbye to Caitlin and Sarah, and Matthew kissed Sarah for one last time before we parted. Terrence was carrying the traps while I was carrying the bag with the meat. The entire time we were setting up the traps, we were silent. I haven't spoken a single word to him. I just followed him around as he put the bear traps on the floor and gently put the meat on them. He didn't speak to me as well. I didn't blame him that much, but I wanted to get rid of that awkwardness that was between us. Now that I knew about his secret, I wouldn't pursue him anymore and we would stay friends. It seemed like he really liked me as his friend, and I wanted to be just that. After we set up all the traps, we climbed into the small hunting tower. We had a great view of all 3 of the traps we set up. One other piece of equipment we had were walkie-talkies. It was the best way to contact others. "Hey," Terrence said into the walkie-talkie. We set up the traps. "We're in the tower now." "Over." A buzz came from the walkie-talkie. "Same here," Matthew replied. "Everything's going great." "How are the cameras? Are they still working?" "Over." Another buzz. A few seconds passed before we heard a reply from Caitlin. "The cameras are working. You can check them from the tablets you took," she said over the walkie-talkie. "If you need anything, just call us." "Over." "Will do," Matthew replied. "Good luck." "Over." After that last buzz, the forest around us turned into silence. Since it was winter, it was already pretty dark. We would still be able to hear if something started eating the meat and would only need to shine our flashlight on it to be able to see it. It was a bit risky, but still the best we could do. As time passed and Terrence and I didn't say a single word between us, it only got more and more awkward. Finally, around 11 p.m., I decided to say something. "Hey, Terrence," I said. "Yeah," he replied, looking at his rifle. "I'm sorry," I said. "About what?" he asked. I took in a deep breath. To calm myself down, I took out a pack of cigarettes Matthew gave me. After taking one out, I lit it on fire with my Zippo lighter I got from my grandpa before he died. It was like a parting gift from him, and I used to play with it sometimes. All my attempts at winning you over, I told him. "I know it bothers you. You don't have to say anything," I cut him off. "I know you don't like me and that you're uninterested in a relationship with me." He looked at me and then back at his rifle. "You're right, but I didn't know how to tell you," he replied. "I mean, you are attractive and interesting and all that, but you don't like girls." I finished his sentence. The look he gave me was priceless. He was dumbfounded that I knew, and he almost seemed like he was afraid. "It's okay," I told him with a smile. "Sarah told me. I still like you as a friend. It took him a minute before he responded. You don't hate me because of it? He asked me. Of course not, I told him. Only a very few people, while the most won't even care at all. It doesn't change who you are and it shouldn't matter to any of your friends. That's funny. He chuckled. I don't really have any friends, other than you, I guess. See, I'm already right, I joked. Both of us chuckled. Yeah, I know, he replied. But I still have that fear, you know. I'd like to say that I do, but I really don't. We were silent for another minute after that. How did you find out? I asked him. Well, he stopped to think for a bit and he looked towards the tiny ceiling of the tower. While I was younger, I had a best friend. He thought of me just like that, a best friend. I had feelings for him and I knew I did, but at the time I just thought that best friends were just like that. When I found out what being gay meant, I realized I was gay, and like the stupid little boy I was, I told my friend that I loved him. He ran up to his parents and told them what I said. I had to pass it off as a joke and his parents believed me, but he didn't. He slowly distanced himself away from me and that was it. I found out I was gay and immediately I lost my best friend. That's rough, I told him. You don't have to tell me that, he said before realizing it. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it. You were just trying to help and I calmed him down. It's okay, I don't mind it. How did Matthew find out? He and my best friend were the only ones who saw through my lies, but Matthew didn't leave me, Terrence told me. He didn't care. Maybe your best friend was just afraid, I suggested. You know that something would change or, I don't know. Yeah, I doubt that. At least he moved away before he grew up enough to realize it was something he could use to bully me. I don't think he would have bullied you. You're just being hard on yourself. I don't know, he told me. I haven't really had the best experiences being gay. You know what? I asked you if you wanted to go out while all of this is over. Let's do it. But instead of getting to know each other better, let's try to find each other our first boyfriend. What do you think? It sounds like a fun idea. He smiled. Great, then we're doing it. I offered him a hand. He looked at it, then at me. And in the end, he shook my hand. As soon as we let go of each other's hands, we heard the walkie-talkie buzz. Look at camera number 5, Caitlin said in a trembling voice filled with fear. Oh, she gulped. Over. I took the tablet and turned it in such a way that both Terrence and I could see the screen. I slowly opened the app and switched to camera number 5. It displayed the forest floor from 17 feet in the air. The night vision made everything look dark green and it gave this weird feeling. The area the camera was pointed to looked identical to everything we saw the night before, but this time, slightly out of the reach of the light from the camera. A figure peeked from behind the tree. Its eyes were glowing bright white and judging by what part of the tree its head reached, I assumed it was at least 7.5 feet tall. However, it wasn't what I saw that scared me, but that primal dread that appeared every time I felt the monster's presence. And this time, it was stronger than ever. CATATER, the last night has arrived. When I was 14, I got really depressed. As I mentioned before, I started blaming myself for my little brother's death and thought that my entire family hated me. I was wrong, of course, but it didn't matter. I hated myself for it. I still didn't know Elle and Caitlin at the time, and Jessica just started to distance herself from me. It was probably the worst time in my life, when the only people you can talk to are the ones you believe hate you the most. You don't believe that you really have anyone to help you with anything. You become depressed and lonely and all you do is hide in your room and cry. However, the worst part is how you start to view yourself. I believed I and my entire existence were completely pointless. My life was worth nothing in my eyes and I did not understand why it would mean anything to anyone. I got a very nihilistic view of the world and it made me isolate myself even more. At first, I feared death because I believed there was no life after it. I thought that all there is in the afterlife is just your consciousness gliding through the endless void. Or even worse, you are positioned nowhere with no ability to perceive anything. The only thing you have are thoughts, and just being able to think and nothing else for eternity just sent chills down my spine each time I thought of it. With time, I started to believe that I shouldn't fear death since I believed my existence and life and after it are equally as meaningless. At that time, I felt this emptiness I did not want to experience again since it was one of the worst things a person can experience. Caitlin and Elle were the ones who managed to get me out of that miserable, terrible state and I was in will always be thankful to them. I expected to never again experience that terrible, almost inescapable dread and fear of meaninglessness and worthlessness that makes you shiver and curl up waiting for a slow death. But I did. I experienced it after seeing those glowing eyes in camera number 5. The dreadful look it gave the camera felt personal. It felt like it wanted to face me exclusively. I didn't know if that was its intention, but it sure as hell almost destroyed me from the inside. If only those eyes stayed there for another few seconds, my soul would have shattered. But it didn't stay there. Terrence and I heard a click as we saw the eyes dart away from the screen. It disappeared. We didn't know where the creature was headed, but Matthew found a way to find out. Caitlin, Matthew said over the walkie-talkie, "Where's the monster headed towards?" "Over. Just a second." Caitlin was hyperventilating. I believe it's headed. Oh God, it's coming here." "Terrence, Taylor, get to the car," Matthew ordered while running. "Over. Understood," Terrence replied. "Over." We immediately stood up and started running towards the car. When we were halfway there, we heard Sarah's and Caitlin's screams. A sound of glass shattering was followed by Caitlin's screams exclusively. Terrence and I started running as fast as we could. "You're here faster," Caitlin yelled over the walkie-talkie. It got Sarah," she cried and screamed. We could hear her screaming coming both from the walkie-talkie and in front of us. Through all of that screaming, we heard a gunshot and stopped for a second. Terrence and I looked at each other and he turned on the walkie-talkie. "Was that you, Matthew?" Terrence asked. "Did you kill it?" "Over. No. It WAS and me. Get to the fucking car," Matthew shouted over the walkie-talkie. Terrence didn't even wait for my reaction. He just started sprinting and I followed him. It started raining and it suddenly got colder. As we got closer, we heard Caitlin scream for one last time before it all went quiet apart from my and Terrence's footprints. Only 10 seconds later, we arrived at the car. The rain prevented us from seeing it earlier, and I don't know if it made me feel better or worse. I turned on my flashlight. The monster's hind legs were protruding from the front window. They were thin and covered in dark brown fur. In some parts, it looked like proper fur, while in others it looked like there was barely any hair. Its true skin looked pinkish. It slowly pulled itself out of the car and revealed its entire body and its dreadful appearance. It had a human-like body structure when it came to its posture. It was standing like a human, but its back was incredibly hunched over. Its legs I mentioned previously resembled that of a dog, but its arms were different. They were long and thin and ended in long-fingered hands with large talons instead of claws. They hung from the monster's torso so long they almost fell lower than the monster's knees. Its torso was haunting. The lower part was so thin it seemed like nothing but a spine and tightly shrunk organs could fit in it. Its chest was so bony it was hard to look at it. Its arms and back were covered in fur, somewhere thick and somewhere barely present, but it was there. Its belly and chest had no fur. It was just its thin pink skin. The worst part was its head. It resembled a very skinny, malnourished mix between a dog head and a human head. The back part of its skull resembled that of a human and the position of the ears was human-like. Instead of being completely covered in fur, it had a few long hairs poking out of its skin. It was a bit more condensed than in other places, but you could still see the pink skin through it. Instead of a nose, it had a snout and jaws of a dog. However, unlike dogs, it smiled. The mouth went from ear to ear and it made it look like the creature was smiling but had no idea that it did. Caitlin's and Sarah's still warm blood dripped from its jaws. Its eyes glowed because of my flashlight and pierced me with their hatred and desire for death and blood. It was a monster like no other. It stood there, looking at us before straightening its back and looking towards the night sky. It spread its arms and let out a sound. It was like a combination of a gurgling, growling, and whistling. It seemed like it was unable to make the sound it wanted to but still tried. After it was done, it crouched down and looked at us while still letting out the gurgling sound. The whistling and growling stopped and it seemed like it was going to jump at us, but before it could, a gunshot rang out through the air and made it stumble forward and fall off of the car. It squealed as its head hit the ground. I looked beyond the car and saw Matthew standing there with his rifle pointed to where the creature was before he shot it. He lowered his rifle and kept looking at us. We believed it was all over, but we were so wrong. In a matter of a second, the monster jumped up, turned around, and screeched at Matthew. It jumped onto the hood of the car and Matthew shot at it once more. The bullet hit it, but it didn't seem like it did much. It jumped onto Matthew and he lifted his rifle to prevent the monster from biting him. Its jaws bit onto the rifle and got Matthew down onto the floor. "Run," Matthew yelled. "Get to the house and call the police." "No," Terrence replied. "We can't leave you here." Terrence lifted his rifle and pointed it toward the monster. Matthew yelled at him, telling him to stop and go to the house. He knew we weren't able to do much or anything to the monster since the bullets didn't stop it at all. "Taylor," Elle called after me crying, and I saw her emerging from behind the car. I took a step forward, but as soon as I did, Elle stepped into one of the bear traps and fell onto the floor face first. I stopped and lost all of my breath. I watched as Elle turned around and took a look at her leg. It was almost split in half and her bone was protruding out from it. She let out a scream, but I could not hear it. I could not hear anything around me. Not Rain, not the monster, not Matthew, Terrence, nor Elle. I turned towards the car and after seeing the monster for one last time, I snapped out of it. I turned to Elle and started to walk towards her to help her. "No," she shouted at me. "Return to the house. Call the police. I'm done." "WH, what?" I asked. "Leave me," she said. "You need to call the police." "I'm not leaving you here," I said, taking a step forward. She lifted her rifle and pointed it at me. "Don't think that I won't do it. If you run, you may survive and get someone to deal with the creature," she explained. "But if you stay to help me, you'll die by the monster. Me shooting you would be a mercy kill." Tears started to fall down my cheeks. I felt Terrence grab my arm and pull me away from Elle. "I love you, Elle," I cried. "I'll miss you too." I saw her give me one last smile before I returned and started running back with Terrence. The damage the creature did to the car made it undrivable, and I just couldn't sit down onto the blood and organs of my best friend. I can't run," I told Terrence as he was pulling me through the forest. "Drop the gun," he yelled back. "It'll be easier." I took the rifle off of my shoulder and dropped it to the floor. We continued running until we heard Matthew scream. Terrence stopped and turned around, and I ran into him. No, I tried pushing him. "Turn around. Run." He looked into my eyes with a sad and terrified expression before turning around. He continued running and dragging me behind him. After a few seconds, we heard the whistle part of the sound the creature made earlier. Immediately after it finished, we heard 6 gunshots, one after the other, before hearing Elle scream. No matter what, we continued running, hoping that the creature isn't that fast. We also hoped that it forgot about us and just focused on eating the corpses. It was a very dark and selfish wish, but I needed to survive, and my life was more important than their bodies. I chuckled when we stumbled out of the forest and onto the road that led to Terrence's house. I told myself that we were going in as we ran for that last part. When we climbed onto the front porch and Terrence was about to open the door, I heard the gurgling coming from the direction of the forest. The monster jumped onto the front porch over the railing and landed on the porch on all fours. The unintentional smile it had sent shivers down my spine, and the fact that it strongly resembled a dog in some parts of its body only made it worse. It slowly took a step forward, slightly raising the front part of its body. As Terrence tried to point his rifle at it, I turned around and jumped over the railing. After falling to the floor and getting my legs and hands covered in mud, I crawled to my right, taking cover from the rain under the tin plate where they put their car. Since one of the cars stayed in the forest and the other was practically unusable, nor did I have a key for it, I could just stay there hoping that Terrence would survive and that the creature wouldn't find me. I heard a gunshot from the front porch, followed by a grunt coming from Terrence, then a shout. Terrence fell from the front porch, breaking the railing and falling into the mud on his back. He was unconscious, and I let out a yelp. He was followed by the creature, which dropped from the porch onto its hind legs, preparing to kill Terrence for good. Instead, it heard my yelp and its head jerked towards me. That damned smile and gurgling sound. It slowly took a step forward while I tried getting away by crawling backward. It was, of course, much faster and covered double the distance I did in the same amount of time. I tried getting in between the car and the wall of the house, but I realized the creature was thin enough to follow me. However, it was worth trying. While doing so, I felt my left hand touch a canister. I took a look to see what it was, and an amazing idea immediately popped to my mind. It was a plastic gas can. I took it into my lap, and since it was completely full, it was harder than I expected. Using all my strength, I threw it onto the monster. It slashed at the canister with its claws and split it into 2 pieces, getting some of the gasoline over itself while the rest poured onto the floor. I took out the lighter that Matthew gave me, turned it on, and threw it onto the creature. As soon as the Sippo collided with the monster, the part of its body covered in gasoline lit up on fire. While the Sippo fell onto the floor and lit the rest of the gasoline on fire, the monster stepped around, screeching and screaming. The sounds it let out along those were so haunting I had to cover my ears. As I was watching it stumble around and realizing that it won't fall, I took out a handgun Matthew gave to each of us. After pulling it out of the holster, I aimed it at one of the creature's legs and took a shot. First missed, but second and third hit it, making it fall onto the ground, and the flames overtook it completely. The sounds it was making became even worse. I watched as it rolled on the ground, burning and trying to get rid of the fire. I saw its eyeballs pop and tried crawling away. In the end, it rolled onto its back and tried reaching toward the sky with one of its arms. A second later, the arm collapsed back to the ground and the monster's head turned to the side. I took in a few deep breaths before falling unconscious due to shock and stress from the entire encounter. Both I and Terrence survived, and there's so much more to the story even after all of this has happened. But I won't be the one to talk about it. I'll leave it for someone else to finish. I only wanted to mention a few things. I found out what that French woman and the guy from New Mexico were doing. Terrence and I have been going to therapy, and it helped us a lot. Since we were the sole survivors of the incident, we chose to stay together no matter what. We mourn all those who have fallen victim to that monstrosity. Matthew, Sarah, Caitlin, and Elle will forever be remembered as heroes, and we will love them all no matter what. Before I leave, I want to tell you one more thing. Stay safe. Not sorry. That would be all. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like. See you guys next time.